Chapter 11:17. Lu'er, who was reprimanded, threw away the sword with the grilled fish in it. Rubbing her forehead that was hit, she pouted in grievance. The people here all let me play mahjong. No matter how I play, it's always me who makes the wrong tiles. It's too boring. Playing mahjong again. You can't make any progress in your cultivation only thinking about playing. Mu Yuanzi flew into a rage. His cane mercilessly hit Lu'er's head. The latter held her head and cried out in pain. Playing mahjong? Yu Qianqiu's expression had already collapsed. He looked speechlessly at the grandfather-granddaughter pair. He didn't think that mahjong had already become popular in Mu Monster Sea. Could it be that there were other mahjong friends here? Just as he was lost in his thoughts, Mu Yuanzi's cane was already pointed at him. He scolded, "It's all your fault. If I see you and Lu'er meet again, I'll kill you with one strike." Yu Qianqiu felt a toothache. He didn't think that saving someone's granddaughter would turn out to be wrong. It was simply unreasonable. However, the situation was stronger than him. This old man was even more awesome than Jin Tai and Bai Qi. He had no choice but to lower his head when he was under someone else's roof. If he couldn't provoke him, he could at least hide. Senior Mu, this junior knows his mistake. Yu Qianqiu first admitted his mistake. He looked around and weakly asked, "May I know how this junior should leave this place?" But in his heart he was thinking, a gentleman's revenge is never too late. Wait until I plant the teleportation landmark and provoke old man by one day. Let's see who is more arrogant then. Lu'er, who was rubbing her forehead, suddenly widened her eyes. Yu Qianqiu, are you leaving? Her innocent eyes turned to look at her grandfather. They were filled with hope, as if she wanted to beg her grandfather to let Yu Qianqiu stay. Mu Yuanzi turned his head indifferently. He couldn't be bothered to look at her. He stared at Yu Qianqiu with a burning gaze and said word by word, "You've cultivated a technique to control the wood attribute?" Yu Qianqiu was stunned when he heard this. The words "would spell" suddenly flashed through his mind, but he did not practice it at all. He did not know why this old fellow would ask such a question. Amidst the clouds of doubt, a sudden gust of wind blew past. The golden leaves of the ancient language tree began to sway in the wind, and the murmuring of the wind sounded once again. The dreamy and illusory voice seemed to be recounting the endless vicissitudes of life, causing those who heard it to be worried. At the foot of the mountain, the forest was like a layer of mist rising in spirals from splashed ink. The mist came with the wind and blew on the three people on the mountain. Mu Yuanzi and Lu'er were used to this scene, so they did not feel anything. However, Yu Qianqiu felt a rich and fragrant spiritual energy seeping into his heart. His mind was instantly roused. Just as he was about to praise and flatter Mu Yuanzi, his brain twitched uncontrollably. In an instant his vision turned black, and images of the starry night sky that he had been dreaming of appeared in his mind. The countless stars that seemed to be in a mess flipped through his mind night after night, and the speed was getting faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the movements of the stars became traceable. However, this scene in his mind only lasted for a few moments. When the wind blew past and the fog dispersed, Yu Qianqiu woke up from his daze. Although he had woken up, his body trembled in the next moment. He looked somewhat excitedly at the mist that curled up from the ink-like layer of forest that covered the mountains and plains, the Eastern Star Map. It was the Eastern Star Map that had been deeply engraved in his mind. For so long he had been helpless against it. However, in that instant it had suddenly been triggered. The pattern was so clear. Could it be that this was the land of great fortune to cultivate the wood's secret art? Yu Qianqiu's heart surged in that instant. He repeatedly repeated the three words, "Would killer see," in his heart. The grandfather and grandson both saw his abnormal reaction and followed his gaze down the mountain. They did not find anything out of place. Mu Yuanzi's walking stick suddenly slammed into the ground, causing the entire mountain to shake. He shouted in a low voice, "Are you trying to play the fool and avoid answering?" Yu Qianqiu's figure shook and he hurriedly cupped his hands and said with a bitter smile, "Senior, you've misunderstood me. I haven't cultivated any wood attribute cultivation technique. On the contrary, Senior's warning just now has enlightened me and I've gained some comprehension. Perhaps I really can cultivate a wood attribute cultivation technique." "Nonsense." Mu Yuanzi pointed his walking stick at Lu'er and said, "If you did not cultivate a wood secret art, How could you have smelled the fragrance on Luer's body? You actually dare to play such a small trick on this old man's head. If not for the fact that you saved Luer, you crafty scoundrel would have already lost your life under this old man's walking stick. Xianxia was confused by him. He felt that this old man was relying on his high cultivation to be unreasonable. He was both angry and amused as he said, "What does whether I cultivate a wood's secret art or not have to do with being able to smell the fragrance on Luer's body? These are completely unrelated matters. Senior must drag it into this. Aren't you taking advantage of your power to bully others?" Taking advantage of your power to bully others? What an ignorant junior. You actually dare to boast shamelessly in front of this old man. Mu Yuanzi's aura changed and directly pressed down on Xianxia with an unstoppable force. Turned pale with fright and stood in front of Xianxia with a whoosh. She looked at Mu Yuanzi and pleaded, "Grandpa, get out of my way." Mu Yuanzi shouted with an imposing manner. "If I want to kill him, can you stop me?" Xianxia was already prepared to run away. At this point he also did not intend to endure it anymore. He immediately shouted angrily, "Old man Mu. Killing someone is just a matter of nodding your head to the ground. If you want to kill me, just say so. There's no need to splash dirty water on me. Damn it. You disrespectful old thing, and you still have the guts to shamelessly teach your granddaughter. It would be strange if you didn't teach her bad things. No wonder Lu always wants to run out. Anyone who sees a shameless old fellow like you will feel disgusted." "Ah!" Lu exclaimed. This was the first time she heard someone scold her grandfather like this. She hurriedly turned around and waved her hands at him. I didn't. I just want to go out and play. I don't hate grandfather at all." Mu Yuanzi was stunned on the spot. After so many years, this was the first time someone dared to speak to him like this. He was so angry that he laughed instead. "No one has ever doubted my character. Good. Today I will let you die knowing the truth." As he spoke, he waved his big sleeves and a thick aura spread out. What followed was the same fragrance as Luer's body, but it was even thicker than Luer's. Made one feel refreshed. Xianxia also couldn't help but take a few more breaths. "You smell it, right?" Mu Yuanzi looked at Xianxia's reaction and sneered. "Lu and I are the wood spirits of the 5 great spirits of heaven and earth. Our bodies are born with a kind of aura that represents life. Ordinary people can't smell it at all. Only those who cultivate wood attribute spells can smell that special fragrance. You still dare to say that you don't cultivate wood attribute spells? You still dare to say that you didn't lie to this old man? So that's how it is. But that wasn't right either." Xianxia looked at the grandfather-granddaughter duo with a face full of doubt. He scratched his head and said, "I do have the possibility of cultivating wood attribute spells, but the key is that I haven't started cultivating yet." Mu Yuanzi snorted coldly and said, "Don't think that I don't know what you're up to. As long as a person who cultivates wood attribute spells devours a wood spirit, not only can he possess the innate magical powers of a wood spirit, but he can also transfer the cultivation of a wood spirit to himself. If it weren't for the fact that you accidentally barged in, this old man would have beaten you to death long ago. How could you still be talking nonsense here?" When Luer heard that Xianxia could devour a wood spirit, she was so scared that her face turned pale. She teleported behind Mu Yuanzi and poked her head out to look at Xianxia timidly. It was as if she had seen Grandmother Wolf. Seeing that this innocent little girl had also misunderstood him, Xianxia immediately said angrily, "Old man Mu. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. If this old man really had the ability you say or the intention you say, I would have made my move when I rescued Lu back to the World Chamber of Commerce. Why would I wait until now to make my move?" When Lu heard this, she immediately nodded in agreement. She knew very well that after Xianxia saved her, he couldn't chase her away no matter what. It was she who stubbornly followed him to the World Chamber of Commerce. Moreover, those sisters in the World Chamber of Commerce were all very good to her. None of them had any ill intentions towards her. Mu Yuanzi was stunned, but after thinking about it he felt that it was true. In the blink of an eye, his tone softened a little as he said, "Maybe you have a bigger plan. Maybe you're deliberately expressing goodwill to Lu, but in reality you're after my cultivation." When he heard that his tone had softened, Xianxia immediately took advantage of the situation and became unforgiving. He was so angry that his face turned red, and he stomped his feet exaggeratedly as he scolded, "You unreasonable old man, why would I want you? Don't say that this old man can't find you. Even if I find you, so what? With your cultivation, it's a piece of cake for you to deal with me. Don't tell me that this old man is tired of living, so I first ran over to let you kill me, and then conspire against you? What *T logic, who are you trying to fool?" When Lu'er heard this, she immediately nodded repeatedly in agreement. She didn't beat around the bush and stood on the side of whoever she felt was right. She didn't think about her grandfather at all as she walked resolutely to Yu Qianzhou's side, looking a little like she was siding with an outsider. Could it be that there was some other unknown reason why this brat could smell the fragrance on the wood spirit's body? Mu Yuanzi immediately fell silent. He was actually a person who thought highly of himself, and had always prided himself on being an otherworldly expert. Even the domineering demon god knight had to respectfully address him as senior when he saw him. These were all things that he was proud of. Could it be that he had wrongly accused someone? Although he didn't feel good in his heart, and although he also had a temperament that thought highly of himself, to be able to live peacefully in seclusion here meant that he was a person who could take things up and let them go. After a moment of silence, he resolutely said, "I'll let you go this time, but if I find out that you're trying to fool this old man in the future, even if you have to ascend to the heavens or dive into the earth, I'll make sure you die under this old man's staff." As he spoke, he was about to wave his staff to open the profound gate and let Yu Qianzhou leave. "Wait!" Yu Qianzhou shouted angrily and raised his hand to stop him. "Let's talk about the future in the future. There's no need to be polite with an unreasonable person like you. From today onwards we'll return to our own paths. Let's first clear up the debts that we owe in the past. From now on we'll go our separate ways and have nothing to do with each other. Let's pretend we've never met before." "Could it be that I owe you something?" Mu Yuanzi sneered and stood with his staff on the ground, revealing an expression that didn't know what was good for him. Yu Qianzhou waved his hand and pointed at Lu'er. He said with righteous indignation, "Back then there were a few experts who wanted to molest Lu'er. It was I who risked my life to save Lu'er's life, and also protected Lu'er's innocence. How much is this debt worth? How should this debt be settled?" Chapter 11:18. Lu'er was stunned on the spot as she recalled the situation back then. She didn't know whether those people who bullied her were experts or not, but she didn't see how much danger Yu Qianzhou had risked to save her. It seemed like he had scared those people away the moment he appeared. She looked at Yu Qianzhou with some grievance and pouted. Hearing Yu Qianzhou's words, it seemed like he wanted to draw a line between them. Mu Yuanzi choked for a moment. He didn't expect this fellow to act like a scoundrel, asking for a reward after doing a good deed. He was too tasteless. However, in all these years only others owed him Mu Yuanzi favors. He had never owed anyone a favor. Moreover, this person had indeed saved his granddaughter. Since he had opened his mouth, he wasn't as thick-skinned as Yu Qianzhou to deny it. This was the weakness of a person who thought highly of himself. Yu Qianzhou took advantage of this point and acted like a scoundrel. "How do you want to settle this debt? How much money do you want?" Mu Yuanzi spat out word by word. He was just short of beating someone up. Although his cultivation was high, he didn't have a single spirit stone on hand. When it came to money, he really had a headache. "Money? I am the dignified sect master of the world commerce. Do I still lack spirit stones?" Yu Qianzhou said with a face full of disdain. "I, Yu Qianzhou, have always been a straightforward and upright person. I won't beat around the bush. I am about to cultivate a set of wood attribute spells. Your wood ocean of massacre is beneficial to my cultivation. I want to borrow your precious land to cultivate in seclusion. After this, the grudges between us will be settled. How about it?" Mu Yuanzi's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect that this person would dare to say he wanted to cultivate a wood attribute spell in front of him. Moreover, he wanted to do it right under his nose. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was extremely daring. After staring at Yu Qianzhou for a while, he stopped looking at him and turned around to face the vast sea of Mu Shahai with his walking stick and said slowly, 1 year. I'll give you 1 year's time. I don't care how long you need to go into seclusion. Once the 1-year period is over, you must immediately scram out of the Woodkiller Sea. After that, you're not allowed to meet Lu'er again. Otherwise, I'll make sure you die." These words meant that he had agreed to Yu Qianzhou, but he added another condition. "Grandpa," Lu'er called out, feeling wronged. Then she looked at Yu Qianqiu and shook her head repeatedly, signaling him not to agree. Yu Qianqiu, on the other hand, turned his head away guiltily, pretending not to see anything. Judging from his past experience, he reckoned that it would not take more than a year to practice the wood secret art. He then shouted, "Fine. It's a deal." After hearing the reply, Mu Yuanzi let out a cold snort. Ignoring Luer, his figure flashed and he disappeared from the mountain peak. He was not afraid that Yu Qianqiu would cause any trouble in the Wood Killer Sea, because if something happened, Yu Qianqiu would have nowhere to run even if he wanted to. This was his territory. As long as he did not open the Gate of Wonders, taking care of Yu Qianqiu would be a piece of cake. Under the ancient language tree at the mountain peak, Luer buried her head to the side with a depressed expression, not making a sound. Yu Qianqiu rubbed his nose helplessly, coughed and said, "Luer, where are your parents? It's my first time here, so I should pay them a visit." "Luer is a wood spirit, how could I have parents?" Luer lowered her head and muttered softly. Yu Qianqiu made an "oh" sound when he heard this. Then he turned to a relaxed smile and said, "Luer, are you angry at me?" Luer did not make a sound, indicating her tacit agreement. Yu Qianqiu helplessly smiled bitterly. With a hint of a fawning tone, he half coaxed and half begged, "Luer, I want to choose a place to cultivate. Can you bring me around the Wood Killer Sea to look around?" The little lass was soft-hearted and could not resist coaxing. She only hesitated for a short while before revealing a reluctant expression. She pouted and said, "What's so good about the Wood Killer Sea? It's the same everywhere." Yu Qianqiu chuckled and waved his hand to retrieve the two swords with the grilled fish stuck in them. He directly floated in the air. When Luer also flew up, he looked around and asked, "Where do you and your grandfather usually live?" Luer heard this and flew into the distance without a word. Yu Qianqiu was stunned for a moment before he followed. Flying over a small plain in a valley, he saw a towering tree that had fallen to the ground and bloomed. The lush canopy covered an area of several miles. There were many egrets nesting on the canopy, and on the plain grassland that was enshrouded in white mist, there were many bison coming and going in groups. It was a natural and beautiful scene. Yu Qianqiu did not know why the little lass brought him here, but he saw Luer point at the tree on the plain and say, "There is a hole in the tree trunk that spirals upwards. It's a natural residence and it's very spacious. Grandfather and I live in there." "Oh." Yu Qianqiu nodded slightly. He thought that it was naturally no problem for people to live in such a large tree trunk, so he asked, "You said that the people in the Wood Killer Sea always let you play mahjong. Are there other people living in the treehouse?" "Only grandfather and I live in the treehouse. Other people do not dare to come here and disturb grandfather." Luer waved her hand and pointed at the vast Wood Killer Sea and said, "They are scattered in the forest in all directions to practice. When I want to play mahjong, I will sneak into the forest to find them." Yu Qianqiu replied with an "oh." He wanted to visit the treehouse to see what it was like. However, he thought that Old Man Mu did not like him and that going there would only be a thrill, so he dismissed the idea. He looked around and sighed. "I'd better find a place to practice in seclusion." Luer did not object, and the two went straight to the west one after another. Looking down from the sky, the terrain of the entire Wood Killer Sea was very simple. There were hills, mountains, plains, lakes, and rivers. The ground was mostly covered with green vegetation. There were no deserts, no gobi, no seas, and no snowfields. It was a planet with green vegetation, and it was not without reason that it was named Wood Killer Sea. The area of this green planet was not big. It was at most 1/10 of the size of the human world that Yu Qianqiu was in. The two flew and stopped for less than a day, and they had already circled the Wood Killer Sea once and flew to the sky above the ancient language tree. There was nothing to be picky about here if he wanted to practice in seclusion. Finally, Yu Qianqiu pointed to a dense forest that was enshrouded in white fog and asked, "There won't be any problems if I go to that forest to practice in seclusion, right? I'll go greet them. They won't disturb you." Luer, who was in a much better mood, flew down first and Yu Qianqiu followed closely behind. The them that Luer referred to were actually some of the plant demons in the forest. They were all dressed in strange attire, and when they saw Luer, they were very respectful. Luer told them the purpose of Yu Qianqiu's visit, and the group of plant demons immediately obeyed. It was as if Luer was their master. After the plant demons memorized Yu Qianqiu's appearance, they all disappeared into the forest, and the silent Yu Qianqiu impatiently sat cross-legged in the dense fog of the forest. Seeing that he entered the state so quickly, Luer pouted unhappily. She was blaming him for burning the bridge after crossing it. Little did she know that when Yu Qianzhou descended into this dense forest that was enshrouded in spiritual fog, the nerves in his brain immediately twitched, and the vast star map in his brain was immediately activated. However, seeing that there were many living people present, he had no choice but to resist. When all the living people left, he immediately sat cross-legged and entered the state, afraid that he would miss the opportunity to comprehend the wood art. Although Luer was a little unhappy, she didn't dare to disturb him. She quietly floated a few miles away, but she didn't go too far. Moreover, she would often sneak back to observe Yu Qianzhou's movements. The forest was quiet and the dense fog drifted. Yu Qianzhou, who was sitting cross-legged, was faintly discernible in the fog, like an old monk in meditation, not moving at all. After a few days, his eyebrows gradually locked together, as if he had encountered something he couldn't figure out. Luer, who had been secretly observing him, was very curious. She didn't know what kind of heart demon he had encountered in the process of cultivation that he couldn't resolve, so she flew and sat on the trunk of an ancient tree not far from Yu Qianzhou, and continued to secretly observe Yu Qianzhou. After another half a month, Yu Qianzhou's tightly locked eyebrows finally began to gradually relax, as if he had already found a solution to the problem. He was here in seclusion to comprehend the wood art. Outside in the ancient forest, the great bright wheel was becoming more and more anxious under the ancient language tree. The fish no longer had the mood to continue roasting, but it couldn't find a better solution, so it could only wait anxiously under the ancient language tree. However, the others, led by Jin Tai and Bai Qi, were still unwilling to give up. They continued to search in the ancient forest, and they had almost searched the entire ancient forest. In the blink of an eye, a month's time quickly passed. Luer, who felt that it was somewhat dull, gradually lost her patience. She was currently lying on the trunk of the tree with her hands supporting her chin, and her legs hooking and kicking as she watched two praying mantises fight. Just as the two little insects were entangled and biting each other, a strange throbbing suddenly spread out from under the tree. The movements of the two biting insects froze, as if they had also sensed that something was amiss. Luer looked down the tree with some surprise. She saw that the mist around Yu Qianzhou was spreading out in all directions like ripples. Not long after, the mist in this area of the forest was completely dispersed without a trace. Luer, who was feeling strange, suddenly stood up. She turned her head left and right to look in all directions, and a strange green splendor appeared in her eyes. She immediately discovered that the surrounding trees and vines were continuously emitting indiscernible specks of green light. They scattered and fluttered towards Yu Qianzhou's body and gathered on his body. At first it was just specks of green light probing. Then it developed into patches. The specks of green light swarmed into the pores all over Yu Qianzhou's body. He's absorbing the wood element. Luer cried out in shock. Then she quickly covered her mouth, afraid that she would disturb Yu Qianzhou's cultivation. However, it didn't take long before Luer felt afraid. The specks of green light of the wood element were pouring out of the trees in all directions at a terrifying speed, gathering on the cross-legged sitting Yu Qianzhou's body in an endless stream. Those ancient trees that had grown for hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years, as well as the vines on the ground, were all withering at a visible speed. Chapter 11:19. Once these vibrant vines and trees lost the support of the wood element in their bodies, they would wither like rotten wood. But how could Yu Qianzhou care about this? He had just successfully cultivated the wood art, and his body was extremely comfortable. He needed to familiarize himself with the wood art and absorb the wood element to form a crystal core in his dantian. How could he care about the life and death of these plants? As he became more and more proficient with the wood art, the speed at which he absorbed the wood element also became faster and faster. The endless cyan light began to converge into a flood, rolling in from all directions. The withering speed of the surrounding flowers and trees immediately increased. The fresh flowers lost their vibrant colors, the grass lost its green color and turned yellow, and the ancient towering trees quickly lost their luster. If one looked down from the sky, they would see a brownish-yellow disk in the dense forest expanding at a visible speed. This vibrant forest was quickly losing its vitality. What made Luer terrified was that as the suction force from Yu Qianzhou's body grew stronger, the wood element in her body would also rapidly flow away if she did not suppress it. It would converge into the surging Xian flood and be absorbed into Yu Qianqiu's body. Those plant monsters that she had persuaded to leave were also frightened. The wood element supporting their bodies was rapidly flowing away. Thus they could no longer hide and rushed back from all directions. They were all frightened after seeing what Yu Qianqiu was doing. He was simply exterminating all the plants in this forest. The plant monster's trembling gazes shifted to Luer, who was standing on the dead tree. After everyone secretly communicated, they sent out their elders. A seemingly trembling old man leaped onto the branch of the dead tree and repeatedly bowed to Luer. "Miss, quickly stop him. Otherwise, everyone will not be able to survive." Yu Qianqiu had already mastered the wood art and could split his attention to his surroundings. After all, this was not an absolutely safe place, so he had to be careful and vigilant. In reality, he had already heard the old man's complaints, but he pretended not to know. He was at the crucial moment of condensing the wood art crystal core, so how could he stop midway? He continued to do what he was doing. Ah! Luer, who had regained her senses, looked at her surroundings and said hurriedly, "You guys quickly go back and defend your main bodies." Everyone didn't even have the time to thank him. They immediately dispersed and flew in all directions, quickly merging into their own bodies. The wood element that protected their bodies stopped leaking. Thus, in the gradually expanding brownish-yellow disk in the dense forest, some sporadic discordant green appeared. In the center of the wood killer sea, in the hollow belly of an ancient tree on a valley plain, a stream of light shot into the sky. Mu Yuanzi was floating in the air. He had also sensed the abnormal activity in the wood massacre sea. He looked at the expanding brown circle of death in bewilderment and was immediately shocked. He turned into a streak of light and shot over. As soon as he flew over, he could easily see Yu Qianqiu sitting cross-legged. The dense leaves covering Yu Qianqiu had withered and died. The green wood element that was gathering from all directions was crazily pouring into Yu Qianqiu's body. Almost all the plants within a radius of 10 miles had died. Mu Yuanzi immediately shouted angrily, "How dare you? Stop at once." Upon hearing this, Yu Qianqiu was shocked. He was afraid that the old man would stop, so he hurriedly shouted angrily, "Senior Mu, you promised to let me cultivate in seclusion in the wood massacre sea for a year. Are you going to go back on your word?" Although he had opened his eyes to speak, he didn't stop absorbing the wood element. Mu Yuanzi had already scurried down. He glared at Luer as if blaming her for not stopping him. Then he stared at Yu Qianqiu and said sternly, "If you don't stop, don't blame me for forcefully interrupting your cultivation and causing you to suffer from qi deviation. Old man Mu, you're going back on your word. You're going too far." Yu Qianqiu was a little anxious and scolded him on the spot. "I promised you to cultivate in the wood massacre sea, but I didn't allow you to forcefully absorb the wood element in my wood massacre sea." Mu Yuanzi shouted angrily. He raised the wooden staff in his hand and slashed it in all directions with an imposing manner as sharp as a knife. It immediately cut off Yu Qianqiu's absorption of the wood element in the wood massacre sea. The torrential current that had lost its destination quickly flowed towards the head of the wooden staff in Mu Yuanzi's hand. Yu Qianqiu's expression changed drastically. Seeing that this old man had ruined his plan, he was so angry that he was about to use all his strength to destroy the wood massacre sea as revenge. But suddenly he was startled. Then a joyful expression appeared on his face and he quickly closed his eyes. Yu Qianqiu's dantian shook fiercely. He sent his divine sense into his dantian to take a look. He saw that there was another crystal core shining with a blue light in his dantian. It formed a circle with the red crystal core representing the fire art, the black crystal core representing the water art, the white crystal core representing the gold art, and the yellow crystal core representing the earth art. Yu Qianqiu was immediately overjoyed. He didn't expect that the green crystal core that represented the wood art would actually condense at the critical moment when the wood element was cut off. The heavens were really on his side. This meant that he had truly mastered the wood art. He couldn't be bothered to bicker with that old man anymore. Luer looked weakly at her grandfather. Mu Yuanzi's anger had yet to dissipate, and his eyes were filled with killing intent as he looked at Yu Qianqiu. Luer was secretly alarmed and anxious. Mu Yuanzi had seen people who cultivated the wood art before, but this was the first time he had seen someone who could absorb the wood element. This was equivalent to grasping the source of the wood art. he faintly sensed that the wood art that Yu Qianqiu cultivated was not simple. One mistake would most likely lead to a disaster for the plants and trees of the three realms. Should he keep this kid or should he kill him or not? Mu Yuanzi's expression was dark and gloomy, and he was having a great battle in his heart. On one hand, he felt that keeping Yu Qianqiu alive would be a disaster for the plants and trees of the three realms. On the other hand, if he killed Yu Qianqiu, he who had always been aloof and virtuous, would not be able to accept it. After struggling for a while, Mu Yuanzi forcefully suppressed his killing intent. He had promised to let the other party enter seclusion for a year, but he killed him while he was cultivating. Mu Yuanzi could not bring himself to do such a thing. The main reason was that he did not want the integrity that he had upheld for so many years to be destroyed by a mere Yu Qianqiu. On the other hand, he was not afraid of what Yu Qianqiu could do. Even if Yu Qianqiu did something out of line, he was confident that he could get rid of this scourge at any time. After all, the difference in cultivation between the two of them was too great. Seeing that the killing intent in her grandfather's eyes had disappeared, Lu immediately heaved a sigh of relief. As for Yu Qianqiu, there was a huge change in his dantian. He did not have the energy to care too much about it. He quickly opened his eyes and looked at Mu Yuanzi. Seeing that the other party was no longer pursuing the matter, he also heaved a sigh of relief. The 10 nascent souls in his dantian had merged into one when his cultivation broke through to the early-stage minor immortal realm, becoming 9. At this moment, the 5 colored crystal cores that represented the 5 elements art had already been arranged. They were rapidly revolving around the 9 nascent souls that were sitting cross-legged. Winds and clouds surged in Yu Qianqiu's dantian. This was not the first time he had experienced this kind of situation, and he immediately understood that his cultivation was about to break through. What he needed to do now was already very experienced. A storage bracelet containing 10 billion divine-grade spirit stones appeared on his wrist, and 2 handfuls of divine-grade spirit stones were already in his hands. Mu Yuanzi and Lu exchanged a glance, unable to figure out what Yu Qianqiu was trying to do. When they turned around, they discovered that the 2 handfuls of divine-grade spirit stones in Yu Qianqiu's hands had their spiritual energy sucked dry, turning from black to grayish-white. Even Yu Qianqiu himself seemed to be frightened by his own actions. Although his eyes were closed, the muscles on his face twitched violently. The dried-up spirit stones in his hands fell to the ground with a huala sound, and 2 more handfuls of divine-grade spirit stones appeared in Yu Qianqiu's hands. However, it felt like a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. With 2 handfuls of spirit stones in his hands, the spiritual energy was sucked dry in a breath's time. Even after grabbing more than a dozen handfuls of spirit stones, he still felt that it was too slow. Fortunately, he had already forged his immortal physique. If it was in the past, his meridians wouldn't have been able to withstand such an overload of spiritual energy. All of a sudden, Yu Qianqiu's arms moved and the ground caved in, forming a deep funnel. Yu Qianqiu was sitting in the center of the funnel. The grandfather and grandson duo were confused as to what Yu Qianqiu was doing, but the storage bracelet on Yu Qianqiu's wrist emitted a series of rattling noises. Black spirit stones gushed out like a fountain, filling up the entire funnel in an instant, burying Yu Qianqiu inside. "Grandfather, what is he doing?" Lu couldn't help asking curiously. Mu Yuanzi had also forgotten about the previous matter. His eyes were filled with doubt as he shook his head and said, "It seems like he is absorbing the spiritual energy from the spirit stones to cultivate. But how can his body endure absorbing so much spiritual energy in such a short period of time? I have also never seen such a thing before. We'll know if we continue watching." Lu nodded and said, "Oh. How could the grandfather and grandson duo know that the 5 crystal cores in Yu Qianqiu's dantian were spinning rapidly? It was like a bottomless black hole. No matter how much spiritual energy there was, it would still be sucked in without any resistance. If Yu Qianqiu didn't use spiritual energy to fill up his dantian, then even his intestines, heart and lungs would be sucked in." In less than a moment, the large amount of black spirit stones that were burying Yu Qianqiu in the funnel gradually turned grayish-white. Almost at the same time that the large amount of spiritual energy in the spirit stones was exhausted, there was a crashing sound as the grayish-white spirit stones all flowed out from the bottom of the funnel. They saw a large black hole appear at the bottom of the funnel under Yu Qianqiu's butt. After all the dried-up spirit stones were drained, the black hole quickly healed. The storage bracelet on Yu Qianqiu's wrist once again spewed out a large amount of spirit stones to bury himself. The grandfather and grandson duo were dumbstruck. They discovered that using this method to absorb the spiritual energy in the spirit stones was indeed very fast. Mu Yuanzi was truly speechless. He suddenly felt that he had lived all these years in vain. In the past he had always thought that he was experienced and knowledgeable. However, today Yu Qianqiu had truly broadened his horizons. Not to mention anything else, there was actually someone who felt that the speed at which he absorbed spiritual energy was too slow. Thus, he used spirit stones to bury himself in a large funnel to save himself the trouble. Chapter 11:20. What surprised him even more was that even though Yu Qianqiu had cast a technique to create such a large hole in the ground with his cultivation, he actually didn't notice much movement. This scene caused Mu Yuanzi's pupils to shrink and his eyelids to twitch. As time passed, the spirit stones in the underground funnel were constantly replaced. Spirit stones were continuously consumed, and there were no signs of it stopping. The grandfather and grandson duo kept watching from the side, and the more they watched, the more shocked they became. Nearly 100 spirit stones had been consumed just like that. Let alone Mu Yuanzi, even Lu Er could see that it was impossible for a person's body to contain such a large amount of spiritual energy. After 100 or so spirit stones, the grandfather and grandson duo, who were gradually getting used to this, suddenly realized that the spirit stones that had been sucked dry were not replaced in time. The grandfather and grandson duo's gazes immediately focused on the inside of the funnel. Mu Yuanzi even released his divine sense into the pile of dried-up spirit stones to investigate. One day later, all the spirit stones in the funnel suddenly flowed into the ground, and the funnel that was sunken into the ground slowly bulged up. Yu Qianqiu, who was standing in the center of the funnel, also rose up. The ground under his feet became flat again as if nothing had happened. Lu's eyes blinked and she looked curiously at Yu Qianqiu. Mu Yuanzi looked at the smiling Yu Qianqiu and sized him up. Suddenly, his expression shook and he cried out involuntarily, "You directly advanced from the initial stage of minor immortal to the initial stage of exalted immortal?" Her couldn't help but let out an "ah" when she heard this. Yu Qianqiu was in high spirits and his face was beaming with joy. He chuckled and cupped his hands at the two, saying, "This is all thanks to Senior's feng shui treasured land." Mu Yuanzi's eyes were filled with bewilderment, but they gradually returned to normal. He narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "You also know how to control the earth attribute?" Yu Qianqiu was startled and he knew he couldn't hide it anymore, so he said perfunctorily, "I know a thing or two." Mu Yuanzi slowly turned around and after a moment of silence he looked back at Yu Qianqiu and said indifferently, "I don't care what secrets you're hiding, this old man hopes that you remember what you said. After a year, scram out of Wood Killer Sea and never meet Lure again." Yu Qianqiu was startled and the joy on his face disappeared without a trace. He then snorted coldly, "I, Yu Qianqiu, am a man of my word. I never go back on my word, unlike some people who don't keep their word." There was a hidden meaning in his words, hinting that Mu Yuanzi had forcefully interrupted his cultivation. Mu Yuanzi wasn't an idiot. How could he not understand the meaning behind Mu Yuanzi's words? Mu Yuanzi didn't make a fuss. He stabbed the wooden staff in his hand into the ground, and a thin layer of azure light immediately enveloped the large head of the staff. The azure light rushed along the body of the staff, and when it reached the ground, it quickly spread out like ripples, rushing into the dense forest in all directions. What a dense wood attribute, so dense that it could be seen with the naked eye. Yu Qianqiu was inwardly shocked. He saw that wherever the green light spread, the withered flowers and grass on the ground immediately regained their vitality. The withered trees in the surroundings also sprouted, and new lush green leaves grew at a visible rate. Looking down from the sky, one could see a green ripple appear in the center of the withered forest, and then it quickly spread to the entire withered forest. Not long after, it regained its vitality, and the fresh green was even more eye-catching than the surrounding forest. Mu Yuanzi flew into the sky from the center of the new green, and swept his eyes across the surroundings. Then he turned into a stream of light and flew into the distance. The legendary withered tree coming back to life. Yu Qianqiu was flabbergasted as he looked at his surroundings. These words suddenly popped up in his mind. When he came back to his senses, he discovered that Mu Yuanzi had already left, and only Lu Er was looking at him curiously. Yu Qianqiu looked at his hands, and his right hand suddenly condensed into a claw that covered a newly grown green vine not far away. The small green vine shook violently for a moment, and then it quickly grew, growing longer and thicker at a visible rate. It coiled around a large tree, and as it grew, the plants in a small area around it slowly withered, as if all their energy had been sucked dry by the growth of this long vine. The condensed 5 claws suddenly clenched, and the thick vine that had turned from a new vine to an old vine suddenly tightened around the trunk of the large tree. It tightened even more, and the vine sank into the tree trunk. "What are you trying to do?" Just as Luer asked weakly, she heard several snapping sounds. The vine that was coiled around the tree trunk could not withstand the great force, and actually broke into several pieces. Other than leaving a few deep marks on the tree trunk, it was not a big deal. Xianxia turned a deaf ear to Luer's words. His clenched fist once again turned into a claw, and the thick vine that had broken into several pieces violently shook and grew again. However, before it could recover to half its original length, it stopped growing. No matter how Xianxia used the wood art to speed up its growth, it could not grow again. He saw that the ground around the vine had turned yellow, as if all the nutrients on the ground had been sucked dry by it. The expression on Xianxia's face twitched, and he looked around. He suddenly opened his arms, and a fresh and clean aura surged out from his body. The surrounding vines and grass were like long snakes that had awakened, spreading and growing wildly. When they reached a certain size, they stopped. As Xianxia's arms came together, the surrounding vines whooshed over, wrapping him like a dumpling in the blink of an eye. Inside the dumpling, Xianxia spread his arms. Snapping sounds rang out, and all the vines wrapping around him exploded into pieces, scattering all over the ground. "How is this possible? How is this possible?" Xianxia looked like he was possessed, muttering to himself in a daze. Then he quickly checked the storage bracelet on his wrist. The 10 spaces inside originally contained 10 billion divine-grade spirit stones, but now one of the spaces was completely emptied. In other words, he had spent a total of 1 billion divine-grade spirit stones to advance his cultivation from early minor immortal to early heavenly immortal. Seeing his dazed appearance, Ro once again asked weakly, "Xianxia, what happened to you?" Xianxia's eyes suddenly lit up, as if he had discovered a new continent. He directly teleported to Luer's side, holding her shoulders with both hands, shaking her. "Lu, aren't you a wood spirit? You and your grandfather should be proficient in wood element spells, right? Are there any killing moves among the wood element spells that are more powerful? Can you show it to me?" The reason why he lost his composure was because he felt that the wood element was too weak. He almost couldn't believe it. The wood element was the one that took the longest time, and was the most difficult to cultivate. Its power shouldn't be this weak. He thought of the earth element, which wasn't very powerful, and couldn't help but have a strange feeling. Could it be that the easier it was to cultivate, the stronger it was, and the harder it was to cultivate, the weaker it was? This didn't make sense. He guessed that he had just learned it and had yet to comprehend its profoundness, so he asked Luer to clear his doubts. Luer hummed like an obedient baby. Xianxia smiled flatteringly and quickly let go of her shoulders. He saw Luer look around and then flash to a small yellow flower not far away. She stretched out a finger and pointed at the flower. The flower quickly sped up, and as the petals withered, it had already produced a mature fruit, flower seed. Quickly plucked it and flashed back to Xianxia. She plucked a brown sesame-sized flower seed from a bunch of flower seeds, and casually threw the rest away. That small flower seed was placed in the center of her delicate palm, and she spread it in front of Xianxia, saying, "Look carefully." And Xianxia nodded his head, his eyes wide open. He stared at that sesame-sized flower seed and held his breath in concentration. In his heart he wondered what kind of powerful killing move such a tiny little fellow could unleash. But on second thought, as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. The more unremarkable the little fellow was, the more unexpected it might be. Wasn't there a saying that concentrated was the essence? It must not be underestimated. Closed her eyes slightly, and her delicate palms suddenly rippled with a faint green brilliance. Not long later, like performing magic, that tiny little fellow in her palm evolved into hundreds of similar illusions. Not long after, the illusions gradually solidified, and the brilliance on her palm disappeared. Hundreds of sesame-sized brown flower seeds laid in Luer's palm. "Did you see it?" Lu'er opened her eyes and she proudly spread out her palm. What did this mean? Xianxia's face was bewildered. He was fooled by this magic-like method. He scratched his head and stared at the hundreds of flower seeds in confusion. After looking for a while, he still couldn't see any powerful killing move. He thought to himself, could it be that these little fellows could explode like an atomic bomb? He raised his head hesitantly and asked, don't look down on their small size. Grandpa said that no matter if it's us wood spirits or those wood cultivators, only those who can master this move have truly grasped the true essence of the wood attribute spell. I spent many years to learn it. Lu'er warned him very seriously. Xianxia's face immediately turned solemn and he thought to himself, oh my. The true essence of the wood attribute spell. As expected, the powerful ones are still to come. He nodded repeatedly and said, don't worry about this. I Xianxia am not an ignorant person who looks down on others. Continue, I will definitely learn humbly. Since you can absorb the wood element, that means you can also learn this move. As Lu'er spoke, she waved her hand like a fairy scattering flowers. Hundreds of sesame-sized brown flower seeds were scattered into the forest. Immediately after, new green buds sprouted from the ground at a visible speed, slowly growing into a plant. The flower buds also rapidly bloomed on the branches. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of newly sprouted yellow flowers swayed in the forest with a fresh fragrance. It was very pleasing to the eye. Xianxia foolishly looked at the yellow flowers without blinking, waiting for the subsequent explosion of power. He was even considering if he should move further away to watch in case he was accidentally injured. Who knew that after waiting for a while there would be no reaction? Tilting his head to look, he saw Lu'er proudly standing there with her hands behind her back, looking like she was waiting for his praise. Xianxia swallowed his saliva with difficulty. He asked in a somewhat incredulous and trembling voice, Lu'er, it's over? Yeah. Don't tell me you want to watch it again? Lu'er revealed a look of indifference. She turned around and found the cluster of flower seeds that she had previously thrown away. Then she peeled off a sesame seed and placed it on her palm. She extended her hand in front of Xianxia and said, I'll demonstrate it one more time, but there won't be a next time. You better watch carefully. Chapter 11:21. It's over. I've failed miserably in a simple task today. As expected, the more harmless something seemed, the easier it was to deceive people. Xianxia immediately had difficulty breathing, his brain lacking oxygen. His face darkened as he stared at Lu'er and gritted his teeth. Lu'er, you tricked me? If they weren't in someone else's territory, he would tie her up and beat her up before saying anything else. A gentleman prefers death to humiliation. Lu'er was stunned. How did I trick you? Xianxia was exasperated and speechless as he pointed at the sesame seed on her palm and said indignantly, what kind of powerful killer move is this? Can plants kill people? You're still saying you're not tricking me? Killing people? Why would you kill people for no reason? Lu'er waved her hands fearfully. I've never learned those killing moves. Even if Grandpa told me to learn them to defend myself, I wouldn't learn them. Xianxia's embarrassment and anger disappeared. He raised his eyebrows and said, if that's the case, it's not that there aren't powerful killing moves among the wood attribute spells, but you don't know. His tone suddenly took a 360-degree turn. Like a wolf grandmother, he said patiently, does your grandpa know a lot? He remembered that Bai Changqun once said that the 5-element spell he cultivated was a great spell of the origin of heaven and earth. After mastering it, it would be very powerful. Even Bai Changqun himself sighed at his inferiority. But now that he had completely mastered the 5-element spell, other than his cultivation increasing a little, he didn't find it very powerful. It was far from Old Man Bai's impressive means. He faintly felt that he had a mountain of treasures, but he didn't find the key to open it. Lu'er nodded, then quickly shook her head. Although Grandpa knows, he won't teach it to outsiders. Teach it to outsiders? Again? Xianxia asked curiously. You mean your grandpa once taught powerful killing moves to others? Lu'er acknowledged and said, back then when my spiritual consciousness was first awakened, it was nurtured in Grandpa's staff and had yet to take form. I once saw a few of Grandpa's friends coming to Wood Killer Sea from the outside world. I heard from Grandpa that their cultivations were very profound, even more powerful than Grandpa's. One of them was said to be the #1 expert of the 3 realms, called Demonic God Knight. Demon God? Yu Qianchou was shocked. Did your grandfather impart a powerful killer move to Demon God? That's not right. Even if a normal person knew about a wood elementalist's killer move, they wouldn't be able to practice it. Could it be that the Fiend Celestial also knows wood elemental spells? Lure shook her head and said, no. At that time there were many things that I didn't understand. Later on I heard from Grandpa that Demon God Knight had many experts under him. One of them was called Demon King Clear Sky, who was also a wood cultivator. Demon God Knight once asked Grandpa for a set of spells suitable for wood cultivators for that subordinate of his. Grandpa wanted to show off that his abilities weren't bad, so he gave Demon God Knight a set of Green Devil Seed cultivation spells. Later on, when the three realms were in chaos, Demon God Knight went berserk and led his subordinates to massacre the three realms. Only then did Grandpa know that he had caused trouble. This matter made Grandpa very vexed, and from then on he didn't easily impart spells anymore. Green Devil Seed? Is that a very powerful killer move? Yu Qianchou licked his lips covetously. Grandpa said that once the Green Devil Seed is injected into the human body, it will silently take root and sprout in the human body. The person won't be able to detect it at all. After it completely takes over the body, it will start to take effect and the entire person will turn green. Under the control of the caster, they will become a wood puppet. The scariest thing is that the person under the spell is clearly conscious, but their own body will no longer have the slightest connection with them. No matter how high their cultivation is, they won't be able to control themselves. They can only watch helplessly as they do things that they don't want to do, suffering mental torture, Lure said with some horror. Why was it somewhat similar to Yan Zhuixing's demon eye ecstasy? However, the torture that made one's consciousness remain conscious was even more vicious. Yu Qianchou pondered and said with a frown, is there no way to break it? There is. Lure nodded and said, Grandpa said that anyone who cultivates this art can break it. However, the prerequisite is that their cultivation is higher than the caster. Other than that, there is no other way to break it. Back then, when Grandpa learned that Demon God Knight's subordinate, the Clear Sky Great Demon King, used this art to wreak havoc in the three realms, he personally went to find Demon God Knight to denounce him. Demon God Knight made that Clear Sky Great Demon King stop using this art. After that, Demon God went to the God Realm and the Demon Realm was sealed, so this art never appeared in the three realms again. Faster thief. One's cultivation needs to be higher than the caster, and one has to cultivate this art to be able to break it. That Clear Sky Great Demon King was able to follow Demon God, so his cultivation must be extraordinary. Then other than him, who else can break it? Yu Qianchou said in shock. There's also Grandpa. Lure shook her head and said, as for whether there are others who can break it, even Grandpa didn't discover it. Looks like it is indeed more vicious than Demon Eye Ecstasy. At least, Demon Eye Ecstasy is not difficult to break. Yu Qianchou was secretly shocked, and faintly worried that that bullshit Clear Sky Great Demon King would run out from the demon realm again. However, after thinking about it, he felt that the possibility was not too high and he was worrying too much. He rubbed his hands and asked, are there any other powerful killing moves among the wood attribute arts? Lure finally became alert and she asked in bewilderment, do you really want to learn those powerful killing moves? Having his intentions seen through, Yu Qianchou coughed and said with a solemn expression, I just want to understand a little more in case I fall into someone else's hands one day. It's better to be prepared. Even if you want to learn, Grandpa won't teach you, Lure said with a pout. Yu Qianchou's expression stiffened. Thinking that it was indeed impossible for the old fellow to teach him, he couldn't help but become dispirited. Seeing that he was unhappy, Lure hurriedly approached and comforted him. Actually, the true strength of the wood attribute arts is not in those powerful killing moves. It doesn't matter whether you learn them or not. Yu Qianchou's half-lidded eyelids suddenly opened, rippling with a strange splendor. His eyes glowed again and he moved his head closer to secretly ask in a low voice, Lu, could it be that there is an even more powerful secret hidden in the wood attribute arts? Lure said with a slightly reminiscing expression, I remember once I asked Grandpa how I was born into this world and why I didn't have parents. So, Grandpa talked to me about the 5 great spirits of heaven and earth, saying that we are the wood spirits born from the essence of the universe, and that we are the most mystical and the greatest of the 5 great spirits. The most mystical and the greatest? The splendor in Yu Qianchou's eyes became even brighter and he asked anxiously, "What did your grandpa say?" Lu'er tilted her head and recalled, "Grandpa said that after many years of comprehension he discovered that the 5 great spirits of heaven and earth should have their own true meaning of life, and our wood spirits is the most profound, representing the most mysterious life in the universe. Therefore the true meaning that we pursue should be the word, life. If we really comprehend the profound meaning of life, we will naturally be very, very powerful." Just this. Yu Qianchou rolled his eyes on the spot. He wouldn't hide somewhere and slowly comprehend for tens of thousands of years or even hundreds of thousands of years, just for the sake of some profound meaning of life. If he did that, he would definitely go crazy. His creed was that 10,000 years was too long, and he should seize every moment. Yu Qianchou casually asked with a lack of interest, "What is the true meaning that the other 4 spirits of the 5 great spirits of heaven and earth pursue?" The little girl didn't know how to read a person's expression and still replied very seriously, "I also asked Grandpa about this. Grandpa said he didn't know either, but Grandpa had guessed that if anyone could comprehend all the true meanings of the 5 great spirits of heaven and earth, they would very likely become immortal and reach the powerful realm of eternal life." Immortal and immortal. Yu Qianchou thought of the fact that he had already cultivated the 5 elemental arts, and couldn't help but stare blankly. Then he snorted disdainfully. It was more like having nothing to do after eating. Just one true meaning was enough, and to spend countless years to comprehend 5 true meanings, it was more like there was something wrong with his brain. He had now completely lost interest. Just as he retracted his head that was in front of Lu, he suddenly exclaimed in surprise. His nostrils flared and he stuck his head in front of Lu again. He sniffed a few times and looked at Lu strangely. "Why can't I smell the fragrance on your body anymore?" Lu, who was proud of herself as a teacher, had a huge change in expression when she heard this. She seemed to have thought of something and took a few steps back. She looked at Yu Qianchou with incomparable horror and said, "Grandpa said that humans who have cultivated the wood elemental arts all desire to devour us with spirits. Could it be that you also want to? Could it be that he couldn't smell the fragrance of the wood spirits because he had cultivated the wood elemental arts? Why was it the exact opposite of what Old Man Mu said?" This thought flashed quickly in Yu Qianchou's mind. He looked at Lu'er, who was abnormally afraid of him and felt a little helpless. He didn't know what to say. To be honest, Yu Qianchou wasn't a good person at all. He really had the crooked thought of devouring Lu'er just now. When he saw that Old Man Mu was too arrogant and thought that he was trapped in the Wood Killer Sea and couldn't escape, he wanted to take the opportunity to kidnap Lu'er and bring her to Utopia, then see how he could devour her. But Yu Qianchou wasn't completely evil. Facing the innocent, cute and innocent Lu, he really couldn't imagine what it would be like if he devoured her. He couldn't bear to do it. Instead he hoped that Lu'er could be a little more evil. It would be best if she could be so evil that he wanted to kill her. Then he would be able to do evil things with a clear conscience. But, Lu'er, don't worry, I'm a good person. I won't do those kinds of things that bad people do. Yu Qianchou had a bitter smile on his face as he was defeated by Lu'er. Now he had his eyes on Mu Yuanzi, but Mu Yuanzi's cultivation was too high. It was not something he could deal with his current cultivation. "Really?" Lu'er asked a little timidly. "Sigh. Whether you believe me or not, I'm going to leave the Wood Killer Sea anyway. You don't have to worry." Yu Qianchou looked around. He really couldn't stay any longer. It wasn't that he didn't want to continue staying in the Wood Killer Sea to think of a way to steal the killer moves related to the wood elemental arts, but he had unknowingly stayed here for almost 2 months while cultivating. He didn't know what the situation outside was like and he was really worried that something would happen to the Daming Wheel. Chapter 11:22. You're leaving already? Lu'er immediately forgot her fear, and her eyes revealed an expression of wanting him to stay. She said, "Grandfather promised to let you go into seclusion in Wood Killer Sea for a year. There's still a lot of time." Yu Qianchou did not answer her question. He looked at her and said with a faint smile, "Lu'er, listen to your grandfather. Don't sneak out anymore. The outside world is really not suitable for you." Lu'er was stunned on the spot, not knowing what was going on. Yu Qianchou waved his hand at her, who was in a daze, and said decisively, "Bring me to your grandfather. Let your grandfather send me out." Lu'er hesitated for a while as though she didn't want Yu Qianchou to leave so quickly. Yu Qianchou immediately smiled and said, If you don't bring me, I'll go by myself. After saying that, he flashed into the air and looked down. Not only was Lu in the forest below, there was also a small silver ball buried with the dried-up spirit stones. The dilly-dallying Lu immediately chased after him and asked, "Are you really not going to see me again in the future?" Xianxia didn't pay attention to her. Instead, he increased his speed and flew far away. Lu's early-stage minor immortal cultivation couldn't catch up to him, but she gritted her teeth and increased her speed. Luckily, the plain where the treehouse was located was not far away. Two streams of light, one in front and one behind, zigzagged down from the sky. They flew past the treetop in the plain, landing under the tree one after the other. The ancient tree had grown for who knew how many years. It gave off a simple and unadorned feeling. The hollow roots of the tree were in a tripod state. 3 sides were ventilated. The old roots were strong and the thin roots were coiled. Could be seen that the space inside the trunk was not small. Xianxia stood outside and didn't go in. He said in a clear voice, "Senior Mu, please open the mystic door and let Junior leave Wood Killer see." As soon as he finished speaking, Mu Yuanzi appeared under the hollow tree with a walking stick. He looked down at Xianxia for a while and said indifferently, "You want to leave on your own. I didn't force you to leave. You better remember what you promised me. Just remember it." Xianxia cupped his fists. "I am a man of my word. Please open the profound gate." Without another word, Mu Yuanzi pointed his cane forward, and a wall of profound light immediately appeared in front of Xianxia. Xianxia was just about to enter when Lu suddenly shouted, "Xianxia, help me send my regards to elder sister Furong and the rest. Tell them that I miss them and tell them not to forget Lu. Lu will accompany them to play mahjong when there's a chance." As she spoke, large drops of tears flowed down her cheeks. Mu Yuanzi glanced at her and closed his eyes. This time he didn't reprimand her like he usually did. Xianxia only paused in his footsteps and listened to her words expressionlessly. In the end, he didn't even turn his head. He let Lu cry her heart out and walked forward with large steps. His figure disappeared along with the wall of profound light. The moment Xianxia stepped into the wall of profound light, the scenery in front of him suddenly changed. He saw the exposed red cliff and the ancient language tree with golden leaves. In the blink of an eye, he had returned to the place he left. Even though he had experienced this once before, it still felt like a dream. Looking back, the wall of profound light had already disappeared. "Where did you go?" Suddenly someone spoke. Xianxia jumped in fright. He raised his head and saw Demingluan standing on the branch of the ancient language tree looking at him. He immediately let out a sigh of relief and said, "I didn't expect you to still be here. If I couldn't find you, how would I explain to Wei Chuanxiu and the rest?" Demingluan flashed down from the tree and said with a frown, "If I didn't guess wrong, you should have gone to Wood Killer C." Xianxia nodded his head and looked around. "Jintai and the rest still haven't moved? Did anything happen?" "They should still be searching everywhere. This is the last thing Jintai and the rest rely on to make a comeback. They won't let it go if they don't find it. Otherwise they will definitely summon us." After Demingluan finished, he asked, "What happened to Wood Killer C? How did you get involved all of a sudden?" "This isn't the place to talk about this. I'll slowly tell you when we get back." Xianxia looked around and saw that there was no one around. He casually took out the human skin mask and put it on his face. Previously, when he was roasting the fish, he was afraid that the smoke and fire would cause the mask to change color, making it inconvenient to use in the future, so he took it off. Now that the matter wasn't over, he still had to wear it and continue pretending to be awesome. Just as he finished dressing up, the two of them were startled at the same time. They quickly took out the communication jade talismans that Jintai had distributed to everyone. The two of them held the jade talismans for a while and looked at each other in dismay. They then crushed the jade talismans in unison. After doing this, Xianxia sneered, "That madman Jintai really dared to do this. It's not surprising. He has always been an extreme person. To achieve his goals, he would do anything." Demingluan frowned and said, "Are we really going to do as he said?" It turned out that the two of them had just received a message from Jintai. Jintai ordered them to immediately set fire to their respective locations in the ancient forest. Moreover, the requirement was to set the fire. Those who disobeyed would be killed without mercy. There was no room for discussion. If others heard this order, they would definitely be confused. Unfortunately, the two of them had heard Jin Tai and Bai Qi casually mention this matter, so they knew what kind of conspiracy it was. Who would listen to him? This guy only cares about himself. He doesn't care about the lives of his subordinates. Yu Qianzhou snorted disdainfully and pouted his lips. Don't you know what kind of place this is? If we really set a few fires here, once we alarm the grasswood spirits in the ancient forest, we will incur the wrath of the masses. The taste of being beaten up by the masses will not be good. At that time, you and I will not be able to bear the consequences. The others don't know about the conspiracy and have no way out. They will most likely do as we say. De Mingluan let out a long sigh. Hearing this, Yu Qianzhou fell into silence. He thought of Zhou Xian and Qin Yong and didn't know what would happen to them. Thinking about it, he suddenly exclaimed, "What do you mean by setting fire now? Could it be that Jin Tai and Bai Qi have already taken the risk to lure Wang Qing and the others here? Otherwise, there is no point in setting fire now." It's not impossible. The two of them saw that they couldn't find that person to help after such a long time, so they won't keep delaying. Otherwise, when Wang Qing and the others stabilize the forces in the Immortal and Netherworld, they will have spies everywhere in the Immortal and Netherworld. De Mingluan pondered for a moment, then said, "At that time, no matter where they escape to, they will inevitably be discovered by Wang Qing and the others. How can they run around like now? I'm afraid that they won't even be able to find a foothold in the three realms. So, it is very likely that Jin Tai and Bai Qi have already taken the risk. They are just hiding it from everyone and treating everyone as chess pieces." Yu Qianzhou nodded in agreement. Suddenly, his gaze stopped in the distance. He was stunned and said, "Someone has already started to do as Jin Tai said." De Mingluan looked back and saw a cloud of thick smoke rising in the distant sky. Not long after, the sound of a fierce battle came from that direction. Boom! The two of them were shocked by the loud sound behind them and turned around. In the distant sky, 6 snow-blue rainbow dragons shuttled between the heaven and earth. A golden flowing light with extraordinary aura and a white flowing light were fighting with each other. That was not all. A black hurricane that was like a pillar that supported the heavens swept over to help. Countless towering trees were uprooted and swept up into the clouds. They really lured Wang Qing over. That black hurricane is... De Mingluan was shocked and said, "Could it be that King Wu Feng of the Black Mountain has come? I'm afraid so. Looks like Jin Tai wants to catch both father and son in one fell swoop. So he took the risk to lure them all over." Yu Qianzhou snorted disdainfully and sneered. Suddenly he saw many figures flying over in groups from the distant sky. It was obvious that they were not the subordinates of Jin Tai and Bai Qi, the two bandits. Countless figures flew into the sky from the forest in all directions. Their clothes were all strange and the color was mostly green. It was obvious that they were the plant spirits of the ancient forest. For a moment, angry shouts and the sound of fierce fighting mixed together. All kinds of flowing lights exploded in the sky like fireworks. "Let's take a look first. If it doesn't work, we'll return to the Divine Ruin Realm and not play with them anymore. Go up." Yu Qianzhou shouted and took the lead to fly to the ancient language tree. De Mingluan immediately understood that it was a bit conspicuous to stand below. If they were not careful, they might be affected, so he also flashed up. The two of them hid in the dense golden leaves and watched the battle outside through the gaps. Seeing that the incomparably powerful hurricane had joined in, the two flowing lights, one gold and one white, immediately broke away from the battle with the 6 snow-blue rainbow dragons. They streaked across the sky at an unbelievable speed and escaped. "Jin Tai, Bai Qi, the two of you have lured us father and son all the way here. If you have any schemes, then use them." A loud voice came from the black hurricane and resounded through the world. It seemed to have seen through Jin Tai and Bai Qi's scheme. However, the two of them were different from the previous times. They no longer ran and stopped but left without turning back. With the cultivation of everyone present, it would be very difficult to catch up to the two of them. Wu Feng and Wang Qing wanted to lead the large number of people gathered from the underworld and various sects to continue the chase, but they found that they were met with great resistance. Countless grass and wood monsters rushed over from all directions, doing their best to stop them from advancing any further. 6 snow-blue rainbow dragons immediately plunged into the densely packed grass elves and slaughtered them as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The whirring black hurricane easily swallowed up the people that swarmed over. This was a completely unbalanced battle, but the countless plant monsters still rushed over without any regard for their lives to die. For a moment, there were endless screams. Wu Feng and Wang Qing's father immediately felt that something was wrong. They hadn't met any resistance along the way. Why did they meet so many people who didn't want their lives here? Could this be Jin Tai and Bai Qi's scheme? Strange. Why are there so many plant monsters helping Jin Tai and Bai Qi without any regard for their lives? De Mingluan, who was hiding on the ancient language tree, was suspicious. He then sighed with some emotion and said, "Rushing over is just throwing away their lives, why bother?" Yu Qianzhou also felt that it was strange. He looked around and his gaze landed on the bronze tree trunk. After a moment of thought, he said with respect, "I understand. They are protecting the ancient language tree we are hiding in, and also the last barrier protecting their home." Chapter 11:23. The Great Bright Wool didn't understand what he meant for the time being. It just couldn't bear to see countless grass and wood demons courageously dying. It shook its head gently and said, "The ancient forest has always been isolated from the outside world. It has never had any conflicts with the people outside. Can be said that it stands aloof from the world, but in the end it can't avoid being implicated by the people outside." Wang Qing, who was wearing a silver mask and a wide blue robe, looked around. He was a little shocked when he saw the grass monsters coming from all directions to die. He faintly felt that they were not necessarily working for Jin Tai and Bai Qi. In a flash, he waved his sleeves and the 6 rainbow dragons no longer slaughtered wantonly. They quickly converged around his body to defend himself. His eyes flickered and a voice came from under the silver mask. "We are chasing after Jin Tai and Bai Qi. We have no enmity with you, so why are you trying to stop us?" Before anyone could answer, a cold snort came from the black whirlwind. "A group of reckless evildoers, those who stop me will die." The range of the whirlwind rapidly expanded, and for a moment, it seemed to have the power to devour the world. The storm-like attacks of the elves were like clay oxen in the sea and had no effect at all. The violent howling of the black hurricane was like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. It covered the sky and the earth, and the powerful suction it produced quickly spread out, uprooting countless towering ancient trees. The ancient language tree that stood alone on the edge of the cliff stubbornly resisted the strong suction, and its golden leaves all flew toward the whirlwind. The strange thing was that every leaf was extremely firm, and even though it shook violently, not a single leaf fell off. Under the suction of the strong wind, the ancient language tree's gentle whisper turned into a sharp, mournful cry, as if it was telling its vicissitudes of life and suffering, as if it was begging for mercy. The burning sea of fire in the distance was rapidly expanding with the help of the wind. The elves had no time to put out the fire, and they all rushed to block the attack of the strong enemy. Seeing the sea of fire gradually expanding in the ancient forest, the mournful cries soared into the sky, and they didn't know why this disaster suddenly befell them. The billowing smoke was sucked in by the whirlwind, blowing past the ancient language tree. The 2 people hiding in the canopy were almost smoked. De Mingluan clenched his fist in front of his nose and said, "Let's go. If this goes on, I'm afraid that even the 2 of us will be implicated." Yu Qianzhou, who was hugging the tree branch tightly in the strong wind, chuckled and said, "There's no rush. There was no hurry. Wait a little longer. If I'm not wrong, there's going to be a good show soon. I guarantee that you'll be able to broaden your horizons. You can't miss this opportunity, hee hee. Is there a good show to watch?" De Mingluan looked left and right, seeing the strong hurricane approaching. He suddenly frowned and his eyes lit up. "You mean the one from Wood Killing Sea?" In Wood Monster Sea, under the hollow tree, Lure sat on a tree root. She hugged her legs and rested her chin on her hands, not saying a word. The tears on her pretty face had yet to dry. Mu Yuanzi, who was leaning on his staff, looked down at her from above. This time he didn't blame her. He thought that a child's heart was broken and that a little sadness would pass. Suddenly, a shrill wail came from a distant mountain. The grandfather and granddaughter pair looked back at the same time, and Mu Yuanzi's expression changed abruptly. He teleported high into the sky, and his eyes shone with a green splendor to see into the distance. He saw the branches and leaves of the ancient language tree on the distant mountain, as if it would be uprooted by a gust of wind at any time. Mu Yuanzi's angry snort resounded in the air. He pointed his finger at the void, and the profound wave-light wall appeared. Fierce winds swept in and thick black smoke surged in. Mu Yuanzi smelled the sparks in the black smoke and he immediately became furious. He stepped into the profound wave light wall and disappeared. The murderous hurricane was getting closer and closer, and Yu Qianqiu, who was hugging the tree branch tightly, felt a little overwhelmed. He was annoyed that he was going to miss a good show. Just as he was about to leave with De Minglun, he heard an angry shout from the sky. Who dares to behave atrociously in my ancient forest? Facing De Minglun's questioning gaze, Yu Qianqiu's eyes brightened, and he nodded repeatedly, thinking that it was finally here. What arrogance! The immortal netherworld and immortal netherworld are the world of us father and son, and even the ancient forest has to submit. A cold sneer came from the black hurricane, and he seemed to realize that the newcomer's cultivation was profound. His tone changed and he asked, "Who are you?" The wood spirits that had been rushing over from all directions saw Mu Yuanzi's figure suddenly appear in the sky, and their grief and indignation turned into joy. They quickly retreated, no longer making unnecessary sacrifices. At this time, whether it was in the sky or on the ground, all the wood spirits knelt and kowtowed to Mu Yuanzi. Mu Yuanzi waved his hand at the crowd with a grave expression and said, "All of you go put out the fire." The hidden meaning behind his words was, "Leave this place to me." All the wood spirits immediately obeyed, and rushed to the blazing sea of fire to put out the fire. Wang Qing, who was protected by 6 rainbow dragons, looked at the old man with the walking stick in the sky, and his gaze gradually became serious. The moment he came out, he saw the black hurricane kill countless people. Mu Yuanzi, who did not like to kill, was also angry. Without saying anything, the wooden staff in his hand turned into a stream of light and shot up into the sky. In the blink of an eye, a huge wave was set off in the sky, and a pillar that supported the heavens directly smashed towards the center of the black hurricane like a meteor. Jin Tai and Bai Qi, who were hiding in the distance, suddenly saw a terrifyingly huge wooden staff appear in the sky. Bai Qi's pupils suddenly shrank while Jin Tai laughed loudly and clapped his hands saying, "Wonderful, wonderful. We finally summoned old Mu. Let's go help old Mu." The two of them immediately turned into streams of light and quickly returned. With a loud bang, the heaven and earth shook. The huge wooden staff pierced into the black hurricane and directly scattered the fierce hurricane. With one move, it broke the fierce hurricane that no one could block. Wu Feng, who was hiding inside, vomited a mouthful of blood on the spot, and was sent flying 1,000 meters away. After breaking through the hurricane, the huge staff stabbed into the ground with a boom, and the ground immediately split into pieces, creating deep ravines. The brown wooden staff that stood between the heaven and earth was simple and unadorned, but it was majestic and awe-inspiring. Mu Yuanzi was standing on the head of the high staff, looking down disdainfully. Wang Qing, whose blue robes fluttered in the wind, was shocked. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and he raised his head to look at the person standing on the head of the staff. He did not expect the other party to break the wind god's staff with one move and heavily injure his father. He immediately activated the sword art, and with a flick of his sleeve, the 6 rainbow dragons immediately roared and attacked. Mu Yuanzi, who was about to be besieged by the 6 dragons, stood there indifferently. Azure light suddenly erupted from the head of the staff beneath his feet. 6 thick ancient vines shot out from the head of the staff in the blink of an eye, wrapping themselves around the necks of the 6 rainbow dragons with lightning speed. No matter how much the 6 dragons struggled, they were unable to break free. It was a spectacular scene of dragons being tied up in the sky. Without the interference of the hurricane, De Minglun and Yu Qianqiu, who were hiding in the canopy of the ancient language tree, saw the battle clearly. The two of them looked at each other, unable to conceal the shock in their eyes. Although the two of them knew that Mu Yuanzi was definitely very powerful, they did not expect that he would be able to suppress Wang Qing and Wu Feng with just one move. Yu Qianqiu had originally wanted to ask Bai Chongqun to help him deal with Mu Yuanzi so that he could devour him, but after seeing this scene he immediately dispelled that thought. Without a doubt, the current Bai Chongqun was clearly not Mu Yuanzi's match. Seeing that his 6-dragon snow blue sword was trapped, Wang Qing flung his blue robes and sword into the sky, floating at the same level as Mu Yuanzi. He said solemnly, "I did not expect such a powerful expert to be hidden in the ancient forest. Who exactly are you?" Mu Yuanzi snorted coldly and said, "Ignorant juniors, even the #1 expert of the 3 realms, the demon god, had to be courteous when he saw this old man. No matter how arrogant the demon god was in the three realms, he would never come to my ancient forest to act so presumptuously. You guys sure are audacious. Do you really think that this old man has a good temper and will not start a massacre? Even the demon god had to be courteous? Wang Qing was shocked once more and he sized up Mu Yuanzi with a bewildered gaze. Why have I never heard of such a formidable expert in the immortal dimension? In a blink of an eye, he slightly understood why Jin Tai's forces had never invaded the ancient forest after so many years of ruling over the immortal dimension, and he also understood why Jin Tai and Bai Qi had lured him and his father to the ancient forest. It turned out that such a formidable figure was hiding here. So it's a hidden expert. Wang Qing cupped his hands and bowed. This junior is the sect master of Heartless Palace, Wang Qing. I didn't mean to offend senior, but I was actually tricked here by Jin Tai and Bai Qi. I hope senior can be magnanimous. You're that Wang Qing who overthrew Jin Tai Immortal Palace. Mu Yuanzi interrupted him and he recalled what Yu Qianchou had said to him earlier. He immediately snorted coldly and said, "Good. You really made things difficult for this old man." It's not difficult for me to be magnanimous, and this old man isn't someone who likes to kill, but you dared to act violently in my ancient forest. If I don't punish you, won't my ancient forest be trampled by others in the future? As he spoke, he glanced at the 6 bound rainbow dragons and realized that they were not ordinary treasures. He resolutely shouted, "Leave behind your weapons as punishment and swear never to set foot in my ancient forest again. If you do that, I can let you go." Wang Qing's breath froze. He couldn't leave the 6 dragon snow blue sword behind, and he couldn't hand over his father's divine wind staff either. Otherwise, even if he and his father joined forces, they wouldn't be a match for either Jin Tai or Bai Qi. As long as he handed over the treasures he relied on, he wouldn't be far from death. Jin Tai and Bai Qi would definitely retaliate, and this was equivalent to handing over the lives of the father and son, so how could he agree? "Old man Mu, we can't let them go like this." Jin Tai's voice came from afar and a golden and white light flashed over. Jin Tai, who was holding the golden cloud rod, and Bai Qi, who was controlling the obsidian light mirror, appeared at the same time. Together with Mu Yuanzi, they trapped Wang Qing in the center. Bai Qi was solemnly examining Mu Yuanzi, but Jin Tai looked at Wang Qing and laughed wildly. "Wang Qing, you probably didn't even dream that this day would come. Today I'm going to make you and your father spit out everything you've eaten, including interest." Chapter 11:24. The smoke in the air gradually dissipated. Although the fire had been very big, it was a piece of cake for the wood spirits to extinguish it without any restraints. In just a short while, not even a spark could be found. The various factions that had gathered from the immortal and netherworld realms had not expected such an instant reversal of the situation. All of them were alarmed. Other than the trusted subordinates of Wu Feng and Wang Qing, the other factions had already started to retreat, quietly withdrawing. While Jin Tai was howling with laughter, Bai Qi's heart skipped a beat. He saw Mu Yuanzi, this peerless expert, glare at Jin Tai with a frighteningly cold light. It seemed to be even more hateful than when he looked at Wang Qing. "Jin Tai, you are nothing but a despicable and shameless villain. Sooner or later I will destroy your body and soul and you will never be able to reincarnate." Wang Qing stared at Kinta, who was laughing maniacally, and spoke in a cold tone. Even now, it seemed that he had no intention of admitting defeat. Jin Tai revealed a vicious light and smiled proudly. "No need for sooner or later. I will destroy your soul and you will never be able to reincarnate." He was just too happy. He had not thought that he would really be able to turn the situation around with just one sentence. Wang Qing ignored him and looked at Mu Yuanzi. "Senior wants to keep Junior's treasure, which is the same as keeping Junior's life. Forgive me, Junior cannot comply." Jin Tai laughed sinisterly. "I'm afraid it's not up to you." The golden cloud rod in his hand was already moving. "My sword intent is unparalleled and indestructible. It won't be so easy to keep my treasure." Wang Qing's eyes shone with a cold light that seemed to be solid. There was a hissing sound in the air. The sleeves of his blue robes bulged and he suddenly clapped his hands together. There was an angry shout that sounded like metal clashing. "Break!" In an instant the air was filled with a desolate sword intent. The 6 rainbow dragons that were bound suddenly erupted with brilliance, and they let out heaven-shaking roars. In an instant 6 loud bangs rang out, and the 6 thick vines that bound them collapsed into pieces in the blink of an eye. It was a god artifact. Mu Yuanzi's eyes flashed. He hadn't expected Wang Qing to be able to break free from his bindings. As soon as the 6 rainbow dragons broke free, they immediately retracted their azure light and turned into 6 streams of light. They gathered in front of Wang Qing with almost instantaneous speed. The 6 swords merged into one, and the huge 6-dragon snow blue sword returned to its original appearance. The sword intent had been condensed at this moment since a long time ago. Almost at the same time, Wang Qing attacked like a bolt of lightning, brazenly drawing his sword. A sonorous sword cry resounded throughout the heavens and the earth, shocking the minds of everyone. A dazzling snow-blue light swept out like a resplendent meteor. The 6th move of sword draw style. Jin Tai and Bai Qi were taken aback. It was the 6th move of the sword drawing style. Both of them had already experienced the terror of this move, so they naturally knew how powerful it was. Qinte thought that Mu Yuanzi would make a move, but what made him speechless was that Mu Yuanzi simply stood there and watched the show. By the time he reacted, it was already too late. As soon as he used teleportation, the sweeping blue radiance caused him to let out a blood-curdling scream, and his entire body exploded into golden powder. The golden powder flew away like drifting clouds, and Qinte's angry voice came from afar. "Old man Mu. You did this on purpose." Bai Qi was luckier. He had already raised his vigilance when he noticed that Mu Yuanzi was looking at Qinte strangely. He didn't place any hope on Mu Yuanzi. In addition, his speed of escape was one of the rarest in the world, so he had already escaped by teleportation the moment Wang Qing drew his sword. The two who were hiding in the canopy of the ancient language tree and watching the show looked at each other. They didn't expect that Wang Qing could still fly into a rage under such circumstances. He was indeed not simple. Wang Qing didn't chase after him. Instead, he held one of the 6 dragon bodies on the hilt of his sword with one hand and slowly turned around to look at Mu Yuanzi. He said indifferently, "Senior, can't you show mercy?" Mu Yuanzi said expressionlessly, "The power of this move is indeed extraordinary, but do you think you are a match for me?" He didn't know that the 6th move of the sword drawing style could not be used a second time in a short period of time. No. Junior knows his own limits. Junior's sword drawing style might be able to intimidate the two of them, but there is no chance against Senior. As soon as Wang Qing finished his words, Wu Feng, who had been shaken to the core 1,000 meters away, recovered. With a pool of blood on his chest, he flew up to the sky angrily and shouted, "Old bastard! Let's see if your wooden staff is stronger or my wind god staff is stronger." "Father, stop!" Wang Qing shouted loudly. However, Wu Feng didn't care at all. The staff in his hand instantly erupted with light that soared into the sky. It let out clanging sounds as it rapidly spun into the sky and grew larger and larger. In the blink of an eye, a shining staff flew into the sky and smashed towards Mu Yuanzi, who was standing in the sky. A trace of surprise flashed in Mu Yuanzi's eyes. He felt the unparalleled power of his opponent's staff. He didn't expect his opponent's staff to be so powerful. His figure quickly soared into the sky and the wooden staff below him was pulled out from the ground. With a rumble, it shot towards the incoming staff. With a bang, the heavens and earth shook and the air currents shot out in all directions like blades. Mu Yuanzi's wooden staff couldn't even withstand a single blow and was instantly smashed into mud by the wind god's staff. Wu Feng laughed proudly. Even Wang Qing felt slightly surprised. Could it be that the opponent was deliberately mystifying things, but in reality he was just a weakling on the outside and didn't have any true ability? However, just as Wu Feng opened his mouth to laugh, it was as if something was stuck in his throat and he couldn't laugh anymore. The wooden staff that had been smashed into mud did not stiffen up. The brown mud gave people a feeling of hitting a snake with a stick. It quickly spread up and countless branches and vines quickly wrapped around the divine wind staff. No matter how hard it struggled, it could not break free. Mu Yuanzi waved his hand and countless thick roots quickly grew out of the vines that wrapped around the wind god's staff. They quickly pierced into the ground from the sky and continued to grow underground. They firmly grabbed onto the struggling wind god's staff and quickly dragged it to the ground. Countless vines continued to grow out of the ground and wrapped around the wind god's staff layer by layer. In the end, it was wrapped into an enormous lump and the original shape of the wind god's staff could no longer be seen. Wu Feng turned pale with fright. This was his family treasure. How could he let someone else take it like this? He hurriedly sent out spells to control it. He seemed to have gone mad as he roared, "This is the wind god's staff, don't think you can trap it like this." The huge thing that was wrapped up in a lump was contracting violently, like a huge heart beating on the ground, causing the ground in a large area to tremble. The surrounding trees were all swaying along with the huge thing's contraction. It was obvious that the Aeolus scepter was trying to break free. The thick vines that bound it were breaking, but the vines on the ground were growing at an even faster speed, trapping the Aeolus scepter there. Mu Yuanzi glanced at Wang Qing. Seeing that he did not help and instead urged his father to stop, he immediately nodded slightly. He made up his mind and looked expressionlessly at the seemingly insane Wu Feng. He snorted coldly and said, "I didn't think I would see 2 god artifacts in one day. No wonder Jintai and the others were not a match for you and your father. Your wind god staff is even more powerful. It's a pity that with your ability, you can't even use 1% of its power. If you could use 10% of its power, I wouldn't be able to do anything to you and your father today. However, your cultivation is too low. This treasure is not something you can easily control. If I wanted to kill you, it would be as easy as raising my hand. Do you still not admit defeat? Hurry up and use your sword drawing form to break it." Wu Feng shouted anxiously at Wang Qing. He completely ignored Mu Yuanzi's words. Wang Qing quickly flashed over and comforted him. Finally, Wu Feng calmed down. He understood that if Mu Yuanzi wanted to take his life now, it would be as easy as pie. Only then did Wu Feng bow unwillingly. "Wu Feng admits defeat. Senior, please be merciful." Wang Qing also turned around and clasped his hands. He roughly explained the grievances between them and Jintai. He made it clear that it was only right and proper for them to seek revenge against Jintai. At the same time, he made it clear that he did not intentionally come to Ancient Forest to cause trouble. He had been tricked by Jintai and Bai Qi. In the end, he begged, "Senior's abilities are difficult for us to match. However, if Senior keeps our treasures, it's no different from killing us. Jintai and Bai Qi will definitely not let this go. Please have mercy, Senior. I don't care if Jintai is in power in the Immortal realm or you too. At least Jintai has always abided by the agreement. He restricted the people of the 3 realms to not offend Ancient Forest. Can you do that?" Mu Yuanzi asked indifferently. Wang Qing was cold, but he was not an idiot. He could naturally hear the softness in Mu Yuanzi's words. He immediately guaranteed, "Senior, don't worry. If we can really become in power, we will definitely not allow outsiders to disturb the peace of Ancient Forest." "I don't doubt your guarantee." Mu Yuanzi stared at Wu Feng's face and said indifferently, "But your father seems to be very unconvinced. I'm afraid that he will make a comeback in the future when he has the ability. Then isn't this old man nurturing a tiger that will only invite calamity?" Wu Feng was shocked. He was indeed thinking of coming back to redeem himself after he could unleash the great power of the wind god staff in the future. However, now was not the time to be impulsive. He quickly suppressed the discontent on his face and bowed sincerely, "Senior, don't worry. Junior will not dare to act rashly again." Who knew that his son would add something even more ruthless? Wang Qing solemnly promised, "If my father does not abide by today's agreement in the future, Junior will sever our relationship as father and son. Unless he walks over Junior's dead body, Junior will definitely not allow father to disturb the peace of Ancient Forest again. But Junior also has a request of Senior." Mu Yuanzi didn't think that he would dare to make a request at this time. He paused and said, "Speak. My father and I have a great enmity with Jintai and the others. I hope Senior's Ancient Forest will not become their refuge." Wang Qing once again cupped his hands and promised, "As long as Senior agrees to this, Junior will definitely not disappoint Senior." Chapter 11:25. From now on, there will be no place for Jintai and the others in the Ancient Forest. Mu Yuanzi looked at the green sea in the distance that had been scorched black by the fire. His right hand opened slightly in his sleeve, and the countless vines that trapped the divine wind staff quickly retracted and burrowed into the ground with a swoosh. As soon as the divine wind staff was freed, Wu Feng called it back into his hand with a flash of silver light. He looked at Mu Yuanzi in disbelief. He didn't expect that the other party didn't covet such a precious treasure. This made him calm down from his madness and start to reflect on his previous actions. "I hope that you and your father will remember your promise." Mu Yuanzi waved his hand, indicating that they should leave the forest immediately. "May I know your name, Senior?" Wang Qing asked with a cupped fist salute. I have always been aloof from worldly affairs. There is no need to say my name. Mu Yuanzi waved his hand again, indicating that they should leave. Since the other party didn't want to say it, the father and son didn't dare to ask. They bowed together and quickly turned into flowing lights and left. The group of fearful subordinates finally heaved a sigh of relief. The capriciousness of the situation had indeed frightened them. They had originally wanted to take advantage of the situation to pursue and attack, but a terrifying expert had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and in the blink of an eye, everyone was on the verge of death. Since they were lucky enough to escape, they naturally did not dare to stay any longer. They quickly followed the father and son and quickly left. From this day on, the news that there was a terrifying existence in the ancient forest quickly spread throughout the three realms. It was no longer a secret. The two hiding in the ancient language tree looked at each other. They didn't expect things to end like this. The most depressed was Yu Qianchou. They had caused such a ruckus in the ancient forest, but this old man Mu had let them all go. He didn't even kill a single one. It was so disappointing. The two watching through the gaps in the leaves suddenly froze. They saw Mu Yuanzi look straight at them. The great bright wheel immediately said, "Not good. He's found us. Let's go quickly." Yu Qianchou nodded in agreement. Just as the two of them were about to leave, they discovered that Mu Yuanzi had shifted his gaze away as if he hadn't seen them at all. With Mu Yuanzi's cultivation, it was impossible that he hadn't noticed them since he had already noticed them. The two of them looked at each other in dismay, then turned around to look at Mu Yuanzi warily, not knowing what he was up to. Bang! A streak of light shot out from the ground, and the wooden staff returned to Mu Yuanzi's hand. Mu Yuanzi raised the staff high into the air, and a dazzling azure light erupted from the tip of the staff. It suddenly shot toward the ancient forest that was full of devastation. In the blink of an eye, a refreshing fragrance filled the air, and everyone who smelled it felt refreshed. Under the illumination of the green light, countless green sprouts began to emerge from the cracked ground, growing at a visible speed. Green grass, flowers, green vines, and trees were all uprooted from the ground. In just a moment, the forest in front of him seemed to have returned to its original state, without any traces of fighting. The wood spirits in the forest all walked out and kowtowed to Mu Yuanzi in the sky. "Old Mu, what is the meaning of this?" An angry shout rang out, startling everyone. A golden light and a white light flashed. Jin Tai and Bai Qi appeared together. Jin Tai angrily pointed at Mu Yuanzi and shouted, "Old Mu, we came to lend you a hand out of goodwill, but you left us in the lurch. Now you even let Wang Qing and his son leave. What are your intentions? Lend me a hand?" Mu Yuanzi coldly snorted, and the azure light at the tip of the staff suddenly retracted. He raised the staff and asked, "Who lured them here, causing the countless living beings in my ancient forest to suffer such a disaster? I didn't even find you to settle the debt, but you came to accuse me instead." "Nonsense." Jin Tai waved his sleeve, and without a change in expression he flatly denied, "It was clearly them who chased us and we had nowhere else to run. Now it's us who lured them here. If you want to incriminate us, you can always find a pretext." "Who set my ancient forest on fire?" Mu Yuanzi suddenly shouted, and his cold eyes stared at Jin Tai. Was he discovered? Jin Tai was shocked, but on the surface he sneered and said, "Is there a need to say it? The fire was naturally set by Wang Qing and his son to make it easier for them to find us. The two of us didn't even have time to run for our lives, so you can't be suspecting that we set the fire, right?" Mu Yuanzi instantly started laughing from extreme rage. If he hadn't found out from Yu Qianchou that this fellow was using someone else to kill him, then he would really have been deceived by Mu Yuanzi. However, his heart was like a clear mirror now, so how could he fall for this trick of his? "Jin Tai, do you really think you did it flawlessly? Do you think this old man has eyes but can't see? You dare to use a mere trick to kill someone with a borrowed knife in front of me? You must be tired of living." Mu Yuanzi shouted angrily, and a majestic killing intent covered the sky. Bai Qi cursed inwardly. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have come back with Jin Tai. Little did he know that Jin Tai was also panicking. It was obvious that the matter had been exposed, and if he really angered this old man, it would be impossible for him to escape. He immediately said in a deep voice, "Old man Mu, don't act recklessly. Since you insist on believing this, I have nothing to say. From now on, you and I will part ways and have nothing to do with each other. Farewell. He spoke righteously as if he had suffered a great grievance. He angrily cupped his hands at Mu Yunzi and wanted to leave with Bai Qi. Mu Yunzi snorted coldly and said, "Stop. You want to leave just like this?" The two of them turned pale with fright when they heard this. Jin Tai gnashed his teeth and said, "Old man Mu, don't go too far. Could it be that you want to attack me? If I don't punish you, then wouldn't all the creatures in my ancient forest have died in vain?" Mu Yuanzi's tone was indifferent, but the air around him had already begun to distort. He was about to attack. "Wait." Jin Tai hurriedly raised his palm to stop him. He said anxiously and angrily, "Old man Mu, you ungrateful villain. Let's not talk about the fact that the creatures in your ancient forest were not killed by me. Even if they died because of me, so what? Let's not talk about the fact that we are both part of the 5 great spirits of heaven and earth. Do you still remember when you asked me to help you maintain the peace of the ancient forest? After I agreed, I have helped you maintain it until now. After so many years, have I ever asked you for the slightest benefit? Have I ever let you down in any way? If you still have the slightest bit of conscience, you should let me leave safely. It's not that you don't want to ask for benefits from me, it's just that you can't find me. Back then, when the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch was trying to kill you, you sent a large number of people here to find me. Do you think I don't know?" Mu Yunzi sneered disdainfully and said with a cold expression, "This old man has never owed anyone a favor. Do you really think that you have never benefited from me? Do you really think that when you were in imminent danger, you coincidentally found the entrance to the realm of the divine ruins? Do you really think that in the realm of the divine ruins you coincidentally found the phoenix plume? Do you really think that by burning the phoenix plume, you can obtain the spirit-transforming smoke by chance? Then your luck is too good. Why don't you think that if you didn't have the spirit-transforming smoke, would you be a match for the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch? If it wasn't for the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch being poisoned by the spirit-transforming smoke, I'm afraid you would have died somewhere long ago. Would you still be standing here and bargaining with this old man?" Scenes of the past appeared in front of his eyes. Jin Tai had felt that the process of obtaining the spirit-transforming smoke was a little strange, but because he couldn't figure it out at the time, he could only treat it as his good luck. Now that he heard these words, he immediately understood the reason. He immediately said dumbfoundedly, "Back then it was you who secretly guided me?" Bai Qi also had a face of shock. The two people hiding in the ancient language tree were shocked when they heard this. They didn't think that there was such a big secret behind the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch's death. De Mingluan glanced at Yu Qianchou. They probably had to thank this guy for hearing this secret. Yu Qianchou sighed endlessly. It seemed that the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch had died because of the spirit-transforming smoke, and it seemed that the person who changed the fate of the 3 realms was this old fellow who hid his strength. He wondered how the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch would feel after his death. Mu Yunzi said indifferently, "Do you still think that I owe you?" Of course. Of course you still owe me." Jin Tai could be said to be throwing caution to the wind in order to survive. He argued irrationally, "Back then, even if you secretly guided me to obtain the spirit-transforming smoke, that was only to return the favor you owed me. What about the many years of favors after that? As long as you let us leave safely today, from now on, our grudges will be written off and no one will owe the other anything. How about that?" Only a shameless person could speak such shameless words. If you didn't even have your life all those years ago, then how could you have everything you have today? Fine. I won't make a fuss about it with a shameless person like you, and I'll let you go today. However, Mu Yuanzi's gaze suddenly stared at Bai Qi and he said, "I can let you go, but he has to receive punishment." Bai Qi was shocked. "Senior, what does this have to do with me? You're one of the main culprits, so how could you have nothing to do with this matter?" Mu Yuanzi shouted fiercely, and the imposing aura emanating from his entire body seemed to condense into a material form. Rumble. The air rumbled as it smashed over with the force to collapse mountains. At this point, Jin Tai couldn't care less about whether Bai Qi was an accomplice or not. He was afraid of being implicated, so he flashed to the side. On the other hand, Bai Qi had been on guard against Mu Yuanzi since a long time ago. When he saw that Mu Yuanzi had suddenly turned hostile, Bai Qi flipped his palm within his sleeve, and the obsidian netherlight mirror erupted with peerless black light. Clang, clang. It instantly dispersed the imposing aura that was smashing towards him. Using this opportunity, Bai Qi teleported and disappeared, hurriedly escaping. "Where do you think you're going?" Mu Yuanzi shouted fiercely and his cold gaze swept through the air. The wooden staff in his hand slashed through the air, and like a meteor chasing after the moon, it directly struck the teleporting Bai Qi out of thin air. Bai Qi violently spat out a mouthful of blood, and his entire body slammed into the ground. This scene caused Jin Tai's heart to palpitate. He didn't expect that even with Bai Qi's cultivation, Old Man Mu would be able to injure him in a single move. However, before Bai Qi could even land on the ground, the wooden staff shot towards him like a soul-chasing arrow. With Bai Qi's speed, he actually couldn't shake it off, and he could only desperately try to preserve his life. He flipped over and swung his fists, and countless layers of fist shadows overlapped like raging waves to obstruct the incoming wooden staff. The wooden staff suddenly erupted with a dazzling azure brilliance, and it effortlessly broke through the countless fist shadows and went straight for Bai Qi. Bai Qi was scared out of his wits, and before he could dodge, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. The wooden staff had already pierced through his chest, and he was directly nailed to the ground. Chapter 1126. A beam of green light pierced through the white shadow and smashed into the ground. Grass and dust flew everywhere as a large pit appeared. Bai Qi, who was covered in blood, lay in the center of the pit. Looking at the shining green wooden staff stuck in his chest, his face was filled with despair and unwillingness. Although he couldn't move because of the wooden staff, he still held on to his obsidian underworld light mirror tightly. This was the symbol of his rule over the underworld, and he couldn't lose it even if he died. The two people hiding in the ancient language tree saw that Bai Qi was seriously injured, but because of the terrain they couldn't see the situation in the pit and didn't know how Bai Qi was doing. Yu Qianchou turned around and transmitted his voice to the great bright wheel with a sigh. I didn't expect that Bai Qi would be the unluckiest one. This old man Mu is really something. He let both sides go, but he didn't let Bai Qi off. What they didn't know was that although Mu Yuanzi didn't like killing, he controlled the entire ancient forest. If he didn't do something to appease the spirits of the creatures in the forest, how could he calm the hearts of the creatures in the forest? Thus, after picking and choosing, Bai Qi, who seemed to be the least deserving of punishment, was the one who suffered the most. Jin Tai looked at Bai Qi, who was lying in the pit, and then at Mu Yuanzi, his heart pounding. Mu Yuanzi stretched out his hand and pulled out the wooden staff, which flew back into his hand with a whoosh. He looked at Jin Tai coldly and said, "Get out of here. If I see you two step into the ancient forest again, don't even think about leaving alive." Yu Qianchou and the Great Bright Will looked at each other. From what he said, it seemed that Bai Qi was still alive. The grass elves in the forest watching this scene immediately let out a cheer of victory. Their previous grief and indignation were swept away. Even the Emperor of the Underworld had been casually taken care of by the seniors of the Holy Land. They felt a sense of glory. In fact, this was probably the reason why Mu Yuanzi chose Bai Qi. Bullying a small fry like Yu Qianchou had no effect at all. In the deep pit, Bai Qi stood up unsteadily. His face was pale and his white clothes were stained with mud and blood. As soon as he put away the obsidian nether light mirror, Kim Tai flashed down and reached out to support him. "Are you all right?" He wasn't pretending to be concerned. After all, if Bai Qi were to die, he would lose a powerful ally and he would be in even more danger. However, Bai Qi did not appreciate his kindness. He pushed him away shakily and said, "Get lost." This was because he hated Jin Tai for only caring about his own life and not caring about his own. Although Bai Qi already knew what kind of person Jin Tai was, he still couldn't help but feel very angry. In fact, no matter who it was, they would be angry if they had such a partner. Jin Tai looked at Bai Qi's swaying appearance. It was obvious that he was heavily injured. Jin Tai couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, "Why are you doing this? You also know that I have no other choice. Even if you blame me, it's useless." Jin Tai forcefully grabbed Bai Qi's arm and flew out. The two of them exchanged glances with Mu Yuanzi and were about to leave when they heard Mu Yuanzi shout, "Wait." Jin Tai was immediately frightened and turned around while supporting Bai Qi. He gritted his teeth and said, "Old man Mu, are you going to go back on your words?" Mu Yuanzi couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. He looked at the ancient language tree and said in a deep voice, "Haven't you two seen enough? Do you want me to personally invite you out, or do you want to stay in my ancient forest forever?" Jin Tai looked over and found that there were indeed two people hiding in the crown of the tree. Yu Qianchou and De Mingluan looked at each other and secretly transmitted their voices. They both felt that Jin Tai wouldn't sit still and wait for death. They wanted to see if Jin Tai had any other tricks up his sleeves. Thus, they rushed out of the ancient language tree and flew toward Jin Tai and Bai Qi. "It's the two of you?" Jin Tai was startled. He didn't expect these two to still be alive. De Mingluan hurriedly bowed. Yu Qianzhou and Bai Qi's eyes met. He coughed and pretended to be concerned as he helped Jin Tai over. "Take your lackeys with you," Mu Yunzi warned indifferently. The lackeys he was referring to were naturally Yu Qianzhou and De Mingluan. Under Jin Tai's instructions, De Mingluan summoned a flying shuttle. Yu Qianzhou helped the heavily injured Bai Qi onto it and laid him down. Finally, De Mingluan drove the flying shuttle and quickly flew them away. High up in the sky, the few of them remained silent. Half a day later, Bai Qi, who was sitting cross-legged and recovering from his injuries, finally regained some of his energy. The first thing he said when he opened his eyes was to ask Yu Qianzhou, "Where is the saintess?" Yu Qianzhou shook his head and said, "I don't know. We were separated not long after we arrived in the ancient forest. I don't know where the others are either." He suddenly remembered that everyone had received Jin Tai's instructions to set fire to the ancient forest. They were probably surrounded and killed by the plant spirits in the forest. He then continued, "After the two of us set fire to the ancient forest, we were surrounded and attacked by many experts in the forest. We were lucky to escape. I'm afraid they didn't have a good ending. I don't know if they managed to escape or not." The saintess didn't receive the news of the arson. Bai Qi saw Yu Qianzhou's puzzled face and didn't hide it from him. He bluntly said, "The news of the arson was only passed to you. For the saintess's safety, the news wasn't passed to her. So she shouldn't have set the fire and gotten herself into danger." "Oh, then she should be fine, right?" Yu Qianzhou casually said, but in his heart he began to curse. "Damn it. Luckily I was smart and didn't do such a stupid thing. Don't worry. Doesn't that woman know how to calculate? She shouldn't be in danger." Jin Tai, who had been thinking with his hands behind his back, suddenly spoke. He turned to look at Bai Qi and said, "Black Wind and Wang Qing won't let us go. They might already be waiting for us outside the ancient forest to walk into their trap. You should quickly recover from your injuries. At that time there might be another big battle. I won't be able to handle it alone. The ancient forest is vast. Even if they are waiting for us outside, it will be very difficult for them to meet us." Bai Qi shook his head and sighed, "My injuries are too serious. I won't be able to recover in a short period of time. I need to find a quiet place to recuperate." "Find a quiet place to recuperate? I'm afraid that will be difficult." Jin Tai looked around and said, "This ancient forest is a good place to recuperate, but we can't afford to offend Old Man Mu. Also, we don't know how Wang Qing and Black Wind's forces are developing. Whether we can avoid their eyes is another matter." Bai Qi slowly leaned against the end of the shuttle and said slowly, "Think of a way to return to the underworld. I can find a safe place to temporarily stay." As he said this, he was thinking about whether Silver Armor 1,000 soldiers and the others had safely reached the Great Snowy Mountain. "Looks like you still have a way out in the underworld." Jin Tai didn't care about the dignity of an emperor anymore. He sat cross-legged in front of Bai Qi and asked, "Is it where 1,000 soldiers and the others went? Can you tell me where it is so I can have some confidence?" "Damn. Another secret." Yu Qianzhou's ears immediately perked up. However, Bai Qi was tight-lipped. He slowly closed his eyes. He wouldn't reveal anything until he reached that place. Seeing how guarded he was, Jin Tai immediately snorted in disdain and said, "You won't reveal a top-secret place. Looks like you are prepared to find a place to curl up for the rest of your life. But don't forget, even if that father and son turn the 3 realms upside down, they won't leave us two behind." Bai Qi coldly snorted and suddenly opened his eyes. He raised his hand to touch the wound on his chest. His expression was ferocious and he said word by word, "Originally, I had the thought of curling up in a corner if I couldn't do anything. I, Bai Qi, am not an unreasonable person, but I am not someone who doesn't take revenge. Old Mu bullied me too much. If I don't take revenge, I am not a man." Yu Qianzhou stood silently at the side. He thought to himself, those who can climb to such a high position are indeed not easy to bully. They are all vicious and merciless people. Let Old Mu's matter go. Jin Tai waved his hand and sighed, "It's not that I look down on you, Bai Qi, but at least for now, you have no hope of getting revenge on Old Mu. It's already good enough if you can get rid of that father and son." I can't kill old Mu, but it doesn't mean that others can't. Bai Qi laid on the ground and slowly pressed the wound on his chest. His expression was ferocious as he said, and that father and son Xingjun and the others can't die in vain. Since things have come to this, don't think about getting away with it. Jin Tai's eyes lit up. You mean you can find someone more powerful than old Mu? If there is such an expert, why didn't you say so earlier? Then you wouldn't have to suffer such humiliation. He pointed at Bai Qi's chest. I don't know if he is more powerful than old Mu, but I believe that old Mu won't be able to do anything to him. As long as he has his eyes on him, even if old Mu doesn't die, he will still lose a layer of skin. Bai Qi looked at him and sneered, you know this person and this is your idea. In the past I didn't have the heart to do this, but now that the old and new grudges are piled up together, I can't care so much anymore. I know him, and this is my idea. Jin Tai was startled. After a moment of silence he suddenly said in shock, you mean San Yi? The great bright wheel who was steering the flying shuttle, was also listening to their conversation. When he heard this, his entire body trembled. He couldn't help but cry out involuntarily, San Yi. He had already turned his head to look at the sickly Bai Qi with some fear. Yu Qianzhou was startled. He didn't know who this San Yi they were talking about was to cause De Mingluan to have such a big reaction. However, when he thought about how even Jin Tai had to call him San Yi, he couldn't be simple. This was the first time he had heard of someone being called San Yi in the celestial realm. He secretly transmitted to De Mingluan, who is this San Yi ? De Mingluan was so shocked that he forgot to reply. Bai Qi laughed coldly, that's right. He is Demon Monarch 3 nights. Jin Tai, didn't you want me to communicate with San Yi last time? I promise you. After I recover I will immediately contact San Yi. As long as San Yi agrees to our conditions, we will immediately open the passage to the demon realm and release Demon Monarch 3 nights and let the demonic path reappear in the 3 realms. Chapter 1127. At this point, how could Yu Qianzhou still not understand who the so-called Third Master was? He was not Third Master at all. Even if he was a fool, he could guess that this Demon King 3 Nights was the supreme ruler of the devil world. Otherwise, these people would not have lost their composure like this. Bai Qi actually wanted to open the devil world and let the devil path reappear in the 3 realms. Yu Qianzhou was also shocked and looked at Bai Qi in bewilderment. He could understand Jin Tai's actions, but he did not expect Bai Qi to be so crazy. It was simply unimaginable. If he remembered correctly, the devil world should have been sealed by Bai Qi and Jin Tai together. The heroes of the devil world had been sealed by the 2 of them for so many years. It was imaginable how much they hated the 2 of them. But these 2 guys actually wanted to let the tiger out of the cage. Once that group of people who shook the 3 realms reappeared in the world, it would be strange if they did not take revenge. This was completely harming others without benefiting themselves. How could these 2 guys dare to do it? On second thought, he somewhat understood Bai Qi's craziness. A high and mighty emperor of the underworld for so many years, how awe-inspiring he was. After being forcefully taken away by others, it was already considered good that he could still maintain his rationality under such a situation. In the end, he was beaten up by Old Man Mu. Just think about it. Old Man Mu did not beat up the main culprit, Jin Tai, nor did he beat up the father and son who had gathered to cause trouble, but instead beat him up for no reason. Wasn't this bullying? This was no different from beating a dog when it was down. Putting yourself in Old Man Mu's shoes, anyone would find it hard to accept, let alone Bai Qi, who was once the emperor of the underworld. For someone like Bai Qi, the principle of, if you succeed you become king, should be clearer than anyone else. Coupled with the fact that he often dressed like a scholar, it was obvious that he was a person who thought highly of himself. This kind of person was not afraid of suffering losses, and what he could not stand the most was being humiliated by others. Moreover, it was being humiliated in public and he did not even have the strength to fight back. This had probably become a great humiliation in Bai Qi's heart, and he would not rest until he got his revenge. Haha. Qin Tai was startled at first, but then he burst into wild laughter. He stood up and said, "You've finally figured it out. You'd rather die in glory than live in dishonor. Instead of being exterminated, it's better to have a talk with San Yi. As long as San Yi agrees to our conditions, it's not like we won't have a foothold in the 3 realms. As long as we have a place to stay, we can be safe for the time being." Who dares to say that we won't have a chance to make a comeback in the future? As for the life and death of the people in the world, it has nothing to do with us. Hearing this, Bai Qi nodded and closed his eyes. I'd rather betray the world than let the world betray me. With a single sentence he expressed the hatred in his heart. What a good, I would rather betray the world than the world betray me. I like it. Isn't it just going to the netherworld? Qin Tai clapped his hands and praised. He regained his ambitious spirit and strode to the front of the flying shuttle. He shouted at the great bright wheel, "Move aside." Leaving aside the great bright wheel, he personally stood at the front and drove the flying shuttle. With his profound cultivation, the flying shuttle's speed immediately increased. The great bright wheel silently stood beside Yu Qianzhou and secretly transmitted his voice. What do we do? These two madmen want to open the demon realm. Once the demons return to the three realms, it will be a disaster for the three realms. Yu Qianzhou was silent for a while before replying, Disaster? It's not that bad, right? It's just a change of owners after a bloodbath. Even if Qin Tai and Bai Qi make a comeback, they will still massacre the entire world to vent their hatred. Whether it's Demon King 3 Knights or the two of them, it's impossible for them to kill everyone in the world. The most unlucky ones are the people from the large sections. In any case, there aren't many people who don't have blood on their hands. It doesn't matter if they all die. Let's wait and see. Bai Qi is actually able to contact the people from the sealed demon realm. I want to see how he does it. Let's wait and see. If it's disadvantageous to us, it won't be too late to think of a way to stop it. Right now, even if we want to stop it, we won't be able to. Worrying is pointless. The great bright wheel was silent. After thinking about it, it made sense. If they followed them quietly now, they could still find out some secrets and prepare for the future. Qin Tai piloted the flying shuttle very quickly. It didn't take long for them to reach the edge of the ancient forest. Just as they were about to fly out of the ancient forest, Qin Tai suddenly slowed down and flew at a lower altitude. He flew into the rolling mountains and maintained a high level of vigilance. He used the rolling mountains to avoid being discovered by others. He was mainly worried that Wang Qing and the others had set up an ambush outside. However, what he was afraid of happened. Just as the flying shuttle passed through a canyon, a figure suddenly appeared from a bend in front of them. The two of them collided head-on. Qin Tai harumphed coldly and made his move decisively. In a single move, the other party was caught in his palm. His 5 claws gripped the other party's head, ready to take his life at any moment. Afraid that there were other people ahead, the flying shuttle disappeared into the dense forest below. Qin Tai's reaction was quick as he surveyed the surroundings. Looking at the person in his hand, he noticed that it was a woman with good looks. Moreover, she looked familiar. A moment later, he remembered who she was. He sneered coldly, "You're Wan Bushing's precious granddaughter, right? Speak. How many people did Wan Gutong send to search for us? Where are they?" Both Yu Qianzhou and the Great Bright Wheel were stunned. Both of them recognized Wan Ling. If this person wasn't Wan Bushing's granddaughter, who else could it be? However, Yu Qianzhou was currently disguised as Niu Yid, so Wan Ling didn't recognize him. Bai Qi, who was lying on the ground, also opened his eyes, staring at Wan Ling. Both he and Qin Tai had noticed her during the Immortal Palace grand wedding ceremony. She was sitting right beside Wan Bushing. Who knew that Wan Ling, whose life was hanging by a thread, turned a blind eye to Qin Tai, as if she was not afraid of him at all, nor did she put him in her eyes. Instead, she stared blankly at Bai Qi, who was covered in blood and mud, biting her lips. "You're injured?" Bai Qi was taken aback by her question. Why did it sound like there was something between them? But then again, looking at her up close, this woman's face really did seem familiar. Yu Qianzhou, the Great Bright Wheel, and Qin Tai all looked at Bai Qi suspiciously. Qin Tai exclaimed in surprise, "Bai Qi? You're familiar with her?" This. Bai Qi was startled. He slowly stood up and walked to Wan Ling's side to take a closer look. The light from the shade of the trees swayed on Wan Ling's face, and Bai Qi seemed to see a sparkling water surface. A hazy scene flashed through his mind, but he couldn't remember where they had met. Did they really know each other? Bai Qi raised his hand and pushed away Qin Tai's 5 claws on Wan Ling's head. He stared at Wan Ling and frowned. "Miss Wan, other than the day of Qin Tai's grand wedding, have we met somewhere else before?" This sentence immediately made Wan Ling, who was biting her lip, burst into tears. She choked and sobbed, "You still remember me? You still remember me? Do you know how long I've been looking for you? It's been more than 1,000 years I've been looking for you with great difficulty. When you left, you didn't even tell me your name. What kind of play was he putting on? Yu Qianqiu and the Great Bright Wheel looked at each other in dismay. Qin Tai revealed an expression of understanding. He looked at Bai Qi and sneered, I was wondering what was going on, Bai Qi. So Wan Boxing's granddaughter is your lover. If that's the case, don't you have to call Wan Boxing grandpa? He finally couldn't help but burst into laughter. Bullshit. Bai Qi shouted angrily. He glared at Qin Tai, then looked at Wan Ling from head to toe. He frowned and said, Miss Wan, you can't talk nonsense. I can see that the space between your eyebrows is still intact. You can't blame this Bai for this, Miss Wan. Have you mistaken me for someone else? You've forgotten me. Wan Ling's shoulders trembled as she choked with sobs. 1,800 years ago, on an island in the Blue Domain Sea, I was bathing in a pond in a barren mountain valley. Don't tell me you really don't remember anything at all? 1,800 years ago in the Blue Sea. Qin Tai revealed an expression of sudden realization. He looked at Bai Qi and teased, wasn't it when we agreed to explore the Blue Sea of Death together? There is no one else who knows about this except for you and me. The time and place he said are all the same. You can't deny it even if you want to, haha. Now that he couldn't become an immortal emperor, he became much more optimistic. To put it bluntly, he was just finding joy in the midst of hardship to amuse himself. The Blue Sea of Death. Yu Qianqiu had heard of this place before. There was a very dangerous place in the ocean. It was said that it was a place to collect the precious material for blacksmithing, the Blue Sea gold essence. However, no one dared to go too deep. Most people tried their luck to find the Blue Sea gold essence in the outskirts. Hearing Wan Ling's words, the hazy scene in Bai Qi's mind finally became clear. It was the scene of him flirting with a naked girl in a pool. Sure enough, the girl's appearance matched the current Wan Ling. He couldn't help but ask, the girl bathing in the pool was you? It wasn't that his memory was bad. To Bai Qi, a mere Wan Ling was not worth mentioning. At that time he was waiting for Qin Tai and was bored. He accidentally found a girl bathing naked in the mountains and wanted to tease her. After playing with her, he left and didn't care about Wan Ling at all. After a long time, it was not easy for him to remember. Qin Tai immediately snorted and said, You admitted it yourself. However, he looked at Wan Ling with some doubt. With his rich experience, it was not difficult for him to see that Wan Ling was still a virgin. He couldn't figure out what was going on. You finally remembered. After that day I have been looking for you, but I couldn't find you. Wan Ling looked at Bai Qi with tears in her eyes and shook her head sadly. I never dreamed that you were the supreme ruler of the underworld, emperor of the underworld, Bai Qi. With my identity, how could I enter the underworld royal palace? You made me look for you so hard. I told you at that time that you had to take responsibility for what you did to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't let you go. Chapter 11:28. Yu Qianqiu and De Minglun glanced at each other. Normally, Qin Tai and Bai Qi would not pay attention to the love affairs of a small character like Wan Ling. However, to the two of them, they had long heard of Wan Ling's name. This woman had a strange habit of stealing other people's men. She enjoyed playing with men. When did she become so sentimental? Suddenly, the two of them couldn't help but admire Wan Ling's courage. She actually dared to play with Bai Qi. At that time, who would play with who? However, after thinking about it, they felt that it was not a big deal. Right now, Bai Qi was like a fallen phoenix that was not even comparable to a chicken. It would be a waste not to play with him when he was in trouble. The two of them were prejudiced by Wan Ling's reputation and didn't know the story behind Wan Ling's words. However, after hearing this, Bai Qi felt a toothache. He looked at Wan Ling and bitterly smiled. Let bygones be bygones. Plus, it's not like I haven't done that to you yet. Plus, I am in a precarious situation right now. How can I be responsible for others? If Miss Wan promises not to reveal our whereabouts, I can let you go. Qin Tai, on the other hand, didn't say anything. His eyes darted back and forth between the two enemies. No one knew what he was planning. But I won't let you go. If you want to get rid of me, you have to kill me. Wan Ling stared at Bai Qi with teary eyes and gritted her teeth. Such an unforgettable gaze caused Bai Qi's heart to tremble. He understood that this girl was not joking. He was speechless and didn't know what to say. Qin Tai's voice rang in his ears. I have a very good hiding place right now. I don't need to take a long and dangerous journey to the underworld. Let me deal with this matter. Bai Qi paused for a moment. He guessed something and didn't say anything else. Jean Tai indifferently interrupted. Miss Wan, you should watch carefully. Bai Qi is heavily injured and is being pursued by powerful enemies. If you follow him, you might not even have it tomorrow. There is no need to lose your life for him. This is a matter between me and him. You don't need to say anything. Let him answer himself. Wan Ling didn't even look at him and directly blocked his words. She felt as though she was going all out. Who cares if you are an immortal emperor, Jean Tai? At this moment in her eyes, there was only Bai Qi. Everyone else was nothing but floating clouds. Bai Qi raised his hand and touched the wound on his chest. In his entire life, no one had ever pursued him with such vigor, not to mention after he became the emperor of the underworld. Ordinary women would not have the courage to do so. He did not expect that after he had lost his power, there would be someone who would do so. This caused a different kind of feeling to rise in his heart. If it was any other time, Jean Tai would have killed him on the spot if he spoke to Jean Tai like this. However, at this moment not only was Kim Tae not angry, but he was even more sure that Wan Ling really liked Bai Qi. He immediately said sternly, if you really like him, you should think for him and not force him regardless of the situation. Wan Ling slowly turned her head and looked at him, waiting for him to continue. Jean Tai waved his hand and pointed at the wound on Bai Qi's chest. He coldly snorted and said, he is heavily injured now. If you really like him, you should think of a way to help him find a safe place to recuperate. Do you want to see a group of people who only have the right to kneel and worship at his feet humiliate him because he is injured and unable to fight back? Yu Qianchou secretly laughed and transmitted his voice to De Minglun. If I am not wrong, we are going to Myriad Saint Mountain as guests. De Minglun secretly replied, why did I hear that this woman has an affair with you? You even held hands in front of everyone? Yu Qianchou rolled his eyes. Nonsense. She hasn't even broken down yet. How could she have an affair with me? He then added in his heart, there shouldn't be any heinous surgery going on right now. Wan Ling had hidden her feelings for Bai Qi, but she was also a smart woman. Hearing Jean Tai's words, a trace of clarity returned to her eyes. She knew that Jean Tai's next words were the main point, and she could roughly guess what was going on. However, seeing Bai Qi clutching his bloodied chest, she gritted her teeth and said, what do you want me to do? Miss Wan. It's not that I don't believe you, but there are some things I need to clarify first. Jean Tai's slender eyes opened and closed uncertainly. A cold light flashed in them as he asked, why are you here? Heartless Palace does not have enough manpower. When we were chasing after you, we sent out a message to all the sects requesting for help. The situation is stronger than me, so I, Wan Gutong, was forced to agree perfunctorily and randomly sent out some people. However, my grandfather has ordered that we are not allowed to directly participate in the chase. Currently, the Heartless Palace has sent people from all the sects to guard the ancient forest, the place where you are most likely to escape. I, Wan Gutong, was sent to this area. As for why I'm here, it's because I heard that you were in the ancient forest. That's why I ignored my grandfather's warning and ran here. After that, I was in a hurry to find out your whereabouts, so I snuck in here on my own. I didn't expect to run into you here. Wan Ling said slowly as she looked at Bai Qi. Don't let this venerable one have the chance to make a comeback. Otherwise, all the sects that participated in this matter will be massacred, of course. Jean Tai suddenly felt like he had said something wrong, deliberately explaining to Wan Ling. Your Wan Gutong is an exception. As for whether or not that day would come, who knew? Wan Ling didn't care whether Jean Tai was telling the truth or not. She continued to look at Bai Qi. The ancient forest is vast. It's impossible to guard the entire outer perimeter, so it's not difficult to leave. Furthermore, this area is under my Wan Gutong's guard. I know where the guards are. I can safely lead you away from the eyes. But where are we going after we leave? Using the word, we, she tied herself to the few of them. Clearly she was determined to follow Bai Qi. Yu Qianchou looked at Wan Ling, shaking his head inwardly. This woman seems to be for real. Could it be that this was the so-called, a grown woman can't be kept at home, siding with an outsider? Jean Tai narrowed his eyes as he looked at Wan Ling, speaking slowly. I'm sure your Wan Gutong's Myriad Saints Mountain has no problem hiding the few of us, right? Doesn't that mean I can be with him every day? Wan Ling's eyes lit up as she looked at Bai Qi, nodding her head profusely. The Heartless Palace needs our Wan Gutong's help, hoping that our Wan Gutong will support them in wiping out the immortal world's powers. They won't be able to guess that you guys are hiding in my Myriad Saints mountain, and I have my own mountain. No one will be able to find you guys. Before she could finish her sentence, she looked at Jean Tai in shock. If Jean Tai's group was discovered hiding in the Myriad Saints mountain, then how could the Heartless Palace let Wan Gutong go? Wouldn't it be a disaster for Wan Gutong? Wan Ling hesitated for a moment. Jean Tai heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. If Wan Ling had agreed too readily, he might have been suspicious of her, and that was within reason. He immediately pointed at Bai Qi and promised, "Miss Wan, don't worry. Once he recovers from his injuries, we will leave the Myriad Saints mountain immediately. In the meantime, we will not expose our identities and bring trouble to Wan Gutong." Women in love were usually muddle-headed, not to mention Wan Ling couldn't wait to be with Bai Qi. How could she make a rational decision? In the end, her emotions won over her rationality and she agreed nervously. Under Wan Ling's suggestion, the few of them quickly changed their attire. Wan Ling didn't need to change herself, because they still needed to use her identity to avoid trouble along the way. As for Yu Qianchou, he didn't need to make any changes. No one could recognize his current appearance, but everyone else had changed their appearances. Even Kim Tae had finally given up on his high and mighty golden clothes. After the preparations were complete, the flying shuttle silently swept out of the dense forest. This time they switched back to the bright wheel to drive the flying shuttle. Under Wan Ling's guidance, the few of them rushed out of the ancient forest without any surprises or danger. Far away from the ancient forest, Wan Ling sat beside Bai Qi, who was disguised as an old man. Jean Tai, who was dressed like a muscular man, also stared at Wan Ling. He was undoubtedly warning Wan Ling that if she dared to play any tricks, he would kill her immediately. Although the speed of the great bright wheel driving the flying shuttle was not considered slow, as they had to avoid the heavily guarded areas along the way, it took them more than half a month to finally see a majestic mountain range that towered into the clouds, Myriad Saints Mountain. Along the way they also encountered many interrogations, but with Wan Ling carrying the identity of Wan Bushing's granddaughter, no one was willing to provoke this tigress when the situation in the immortal world had suddenly changed, so they arrived at their destination safely. With Wan Ling present, the Myriad Saints Mountain's protective formation and tight defense were completely ineffective against them. The flying shuttle directly bypassed the majestic main peak and flew to the back mountain. Yu Qianchou couldn't help but take a few more glances at the magnificent palace on the majestic main peak. He guessed that it was the famous Myriad Saints Palace in the immortal world. On the top of a mountain shrouded in clouds and mist, Wan Ling used a technique to break the protective formation, and the flying shuttle flew through the clouds and landed in the manor at the top of the mountain. On the contrary, the sky outside was clear. The few people who came here for the first time couldn't help but look around. Clouds surged around the mountain peak and wild cranes flew past leisurely. From time to time they could see streams of light streaking across the sky. The manor was surrounded by layers of green pine trees, and the flowers in the garden swayed in the wind. It was beautiful and tranquil. It was like a place where immortal happiness could be enjoyed forever. It was like a woman's residence, but it was a little cold and quiet. There was not a single person in sight. A few white deer that were domesticated on the mountain were not afraid of strangers. They actually walked in and out of the manor's gate leisurely. When they saw Wan Ling had returned, they immediately ran over with their hooves and surrounded Wan Ling to show their affection. After landing, Wan Ling heaved a sigh of relief. She finally arrived safely without any surprises. She dispersed the white deer that surrounded her and said to the few people, "All right. There's no one else here and no one will barge in without my permission. You guys can show your original appearance and walk around the manor without worry. But just in case, try not to show your face in case of any accidents." Her words were not a lie. In the entire Myriad Saints Mountain, even her grandfather Wan Bushing didn't dare to barge in. Otherwise it would incur her wrath. She could throw a tantrum outside, but in here no one knew that she was often depressed or even washed her face with tears. This was her privacy and she didn't want anyone to see it. Over time, the entire Myriad Saints Mountain knew that no one could barge in here, causing many people to curse her for being crazy. But now it had become the perfect hiding place for the few of them.